"Get back inside, Elena. You'll embarrass us all." Her father said it without looking up. Her sister stood at the mirror in a borrowed dress while the whole town primped and polished itself for a man none of them had met. Elena had grease on her hands and blood on her knuckle from the barbed wire she'd just restrung alone before sunrise, and not one person in that house had noticed she'd kept the ranch alive through another night. Then Rowan Hayes rode in. He walked past Savannah without slowing. He walked straight to the woman in worn boots holding a wrench. And everything Red Hollow thought it knew collapsed in a single moment. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. The morning Rowan Hayes was supposed to ride into Red Hollow, Elena Brooks was already on her knees in the dirt. Not praying. Working. The south fence line had split clean through in the night. One of the old cedar posts had rotted at the base and finally given out, and 3 head of cattle had wandered into the Calhoun property before sunrise. Elena had found the gap at first light, tied the animals to the old oak at the ridge, and gone back for wire and a replacement post before her father had even stirred in his bed. She drove the new post herself, tamped the earth down with the flat of a rock, wound the barbed wire with her bare hands, careful, pulling the tension tight the way her grandfather had shown her when she was 11 years old. Her fingers bled a little at the knuckle where the wire bit through, and she pressed her palm against her work pants and kept moving. There was no one to help her. There never was. By the time she came back through the yard, Dottie Marsh from 2 lots over was already hanging out her washing and watching with that expression Elena had grown used to, a mix of pity and bafflement, like watching someone carry a boulder no one had asked them to pick up. "Your sister's up," Dottie called out. "Saw the lamp in her window." "Good for her," Elena said. She kept walking. Inside the Brooks house, the kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and Savannah's perfume, which was a combination that Elena had come to associate with everything wrong with their lives. Her sister was seated at the table, actually seated while their father stood at the counter refilling his mug, and 2 of the town women, Betty Crane and Loretta Voss, fussed over the curls in Savannah's hair. Nobody acknowledged Elena walking in. She went to the sink, turned on the water, and began scrubbing the blood and rust off her hands. "Ellie, move over," Savannah said, appearing beside her with an empty glass. "I need to rinse the brush." Elena moved. She didn't say anything. She dried her hands on the dish towel, poured herself what was left in the coffee pot, and stood against the far wall drinking it, while Loretta Voss told Savannah to angle her chin higher, and Betty Crane said that Rowan Hayes had reportedly turned down 3 women in the last county who'd been considered excellent prospects. "He's particular," Betty said, like that was a virtue. "He's not just looking for a pretty face." Loretta made a sound of disagreement. "Of course he is. Every man with money is looking for a pretty face. He just doesn't want to say so outright." Savannah smiled at her reflection in the dark window. Elena drank her coffee. "Elena." Her father's voice came from the corner of the room, low and deliberate, the way he spoke when he'd already made a decision and was only informing her of it now. "You're going to stay close to the house today." She looked at him. Gerald Brooks was 53 years old, but he'd aged badly. The drinking and the grief and the slow suffocation of a man who'd once had ambitions had carved deep lines into his face and left him with the particular bitterness of someone who blamed the world for what he'd done to himself. He still had the posture of the man he used to be. That was about all. "I've got to check the pump housing before noon," Elena said. "The pressure valve. I don't care about the pump." He set his mug down with a hard sound. "Rowan Hayes is coming through Red Hollow today, and I won't have you running around looking like a field hand when important people are watching." A beat of silence. Elena looked at him very steadily. "I am a field hand, Dad. Someone has to be." Savannah let out a small, practiced laugh, the kind that wasn't exactly mean, but wasn't kind either. Betty and Loretta exchanged a glance. Gerald's jaw tightened. "You'll stay near the house. You'll clean yourself up. And you will not speak unless spoken to when the Hayes party comes through. Is that understood?" Elena put her empty mug in the sink. "I'll be at the pump," she said. And she walked out. She heard him call her name once sharply as the screen door swung shut behind her. She didn't stop. Chuan. The thing about Red Hollow was that it was small enough that news arrived before the people it was about. By mid-morning, everyone in town had been told through a chain of porches and back fences and general store conversations that Rowan Hayes and his ranch foreman, a man named Cal Briggs, had passed the county road turnoff at 9 o'clock and were expected in town before noon. The name Rowan Hayes meant something in this part of Texas. His family had come to prominence 2 generations back. His grandfather had built Hayes Ridge Ranch from raw land and stubbornness, and his father, William Hayes, had expanded it into something that people spoke of the way they spoke of landmarks. The ranch covered more than 14,000 acres. It ran cattle, grew feed grain, and had water rights that most of the surrounding counties would have traded their dignity for. Rowan himself had taken over at 29 when his father died, which was 4 years ago now. He was 33. He was not married. That last fact was the one that Red Hollow had arranged itself around today. Elena knew all of this the same way she knew everything that happened in town. She overheard it while she worked, while she fixed things, while she carried and hauled and repaired the pieces of a life her father was too gone to hold together. She didn't seek the gossip. It found her anyway. What she knew beyond the gossip was what she'd heard about the man's business, and that was what actually interested her, in the way that practical things interested her more than spectacle. Hayes Ridge had been struggling since William Hayes died. Not publicly, not in ways that showed on the surface, but the word among the grain suppliers and the equipment lenders was that the old man had left the operation in complicated shape. Some said there were debts. Some said there were agreements that hadn't been properly resolved. Some said the estate lawyers were still untangling the whole thing 2 years on. She'd thought about that while she fixed the fence that morning. Thought about what it would take to hold a place like that together. What kind of person it would require. Then she'd stopped thinking about it because the pump housing needed attention, and she didn't have time for speculation. She was elbow deep in the pressure valve assembly when she heard the horses on the road. She didn't look up. The sound passed 2 horses moving at a confident walk, not hurried. She heard voices from the direction of the main street, a swelling of sound that meant people were gathering. She kept her hands on the valve. The washer had cracked, and she'd fashioned a replacement from a piece of belt leather, but the seal needed to be tight, or it would fail within the week and they couldn't afford to lose water pressure again. She worked. 30 feet away through the fence and across the yard, her father appeared on the porch in his pressed shirt, the one he saved for occasions, and called toward the road with the easy confidence of a man performing generosity. She could hear Savannah's heels on the wood boards. She could hear Betty Crane's excited murmur. She pressed the new washer into place and torqued the fitting down. That was when the footsteps changed direction. She didn't notice it at first. She was focused on the seal on the pressure on whether the valve housing was going to hold. But gradually, she became aware that the sound of hooves had stopped somewhere closer than the main street. That there were boot steps on the dry ground. That someone had come around the side of the property instead of stopping at the front. "Ma'am?" She looked up. There were 2 men. The one who'd spoken was standing 6 feet away, and he was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not curiosity exactly. Not pity. Not the impatient assessment she got from most strangers. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and he was dressed plainly for a man with his reputation. Good boots, good hat, nothing showy. He had the kind of face that had been weathered by actual outdoor work, not by decoration. The man beside him, shorter and older, was watching the main street rather than her. Elena sat back on her heels and looked at the man who'd spoken. "Help you with something." "Is this the Brooks property?" "It is." "I'm Rowan Hayes." Elena wiped her hands on her pants. She did not stand up immediately. She finished wiping first because her hands were still greasy, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. Then she stood. "Elena Brooks," she said. She did not offer her hand because it was still stained at the knuckle. "The house is out front. My father's probably on the porch." "I know," Rowan Hayes said. "I saw the porch." He paused. "What's wrong with the pump?" She looked at him for a moment. Pressure valve. The washer cracked, probably been failing for a while, but it finally lost the seal last week. I replaced it with leather as a temporary fix. We'll need a proper rubber washer from the supply house before winter. He crouched down and looked at the housing. Not performatively, actually looked the way someone looks when they're assessing a real problem. That's a Type 4 housing, he said. You find the right size. Close enough. It'll hold if we're careful with the pressure. He looked up at her from his crouch. You do all the maintenance on this property. Something in the question, not condescending, just direct, made her answer without deflecting. Most of it. He stood back up. His foreman was still watching the street. Rowan Hayes was still watching her. Your father's waiting, she said. I know, he said again, and he didn't move. The silence stretched for 3 beats, 4, 5. Elena was accustomed to silence. She'd built a whole life in the spaces other people left empty. But this one was different. This one had weight to it, and she couldn't tell if she was imagining that or not. You weren't expecting visitors, he said finally. I wasn't expecting to be included in the visitors, she said. It came out more plainly than she intended, but she didn't walk it back. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not pity. She would have recognized pity, and it would have closed her off entirely. This was closer to recognition. Like he'd heard something true and was noting it. Come up front, he said. When you're ready. He turned and walked back around the house. Elena stood in the yard for a moment after he'd gone. Then she picked up her tools, put them in the box, and followed. The scene at the front of the house was everything Elena expected. Her father had arranged the porch with the effortful casualness of a man staging a performance. The 2 good chairs had been brought out, and Savannah was positioned between them like a portrait waiting to be admired. Loretta Voss and Betty Crane had retreated to a respectful distance, but they were still close enough to watch. Half a dozen neighbors had found reasons to be within eyeline of the Brooks yard. Rowan Hayes stood in front of the porch with his foreman hat in hand, and he was politely enduring Gerald Brooks's welcome speech. One of the finest daughters in all of Red Hollow, Gerald was saying, gesturing toward Savannah with the particular pride of a man presenting merchandise he didn't earn. Savannah's a good girl, capable. She's been raised right. Savannah smiled with practiced warmth. Elena came around the side of the house and stopped at the edge of the yard. She watched Gerald's face as he registered her arrival, the flash of irritation behind his eyes, the quick calculation of a man deciding whether to acknowledge her or not. He chose not. Mr. Hayes, he continued, I think you'll find that Miss Brooks, Rowan Hayes said. He was looking at Elena. Gerald stopped speaking. Savannah's smile faltered. Rowan Hayes crossed the yard in 5 deliberate steps, stopping in front of Elena. He was looking at her with the same direct, unclassifiable attention he'd had at the pump. Up close, she could see that his eyes were the particular gray of overcast sky, before rain, pale clear, not cold but not warm either. Watchful. You left your tools, he said. He held out the wrench she'd set on the pump housing. She'd forgotten it. She took it. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. Behind him, she was aware of the silence that had fallen over the yard. Betty Crane had grabbed Loretta Voss's arm. Her father's expression had gone very still. Rowan Hayes said at a volume that carried, I'd like to speak with Elena. If there's somewhere she can clean up first, I'm happy to wait. The explosion was not immediate. That was the interesting thing. It happened in stages. First, there was the silence, a collective held breath from everyone in the yard and on the porch and pressed up against the fence line. 4 full seconds where nobody moved or spoke, and the word Elena seemed to hang in the air like it was written there. Then Gerald Brooks said very carefully, I think perhaps Mr. Hayes means, I mean what I said, Rowan said. Pleasantly, without apology. Then the murmuring started. Elena heard it the way you hear weather coming before you can identify individual words, you know the temperature of it. Confused. offended, genuinely baffled. She caught fragments as she stood there with the wrench still in her hand. Elena, the one who works the farm. He can't be serious. What does that mean? Speak with her. Gerald's going to be furious. Savannah's voice came from the porch, low and controlled, because Savannah had been trained since childhood to never be publicly undignified. Perhaps there's been some confusion about who. No confusion, Rowan said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He turned back toward Elena. I saw you working this morning when we came through the edge of the property, before I came to the house. You had the east fence down and you were restringing it yourself. He paused. It's good work. The tension's right. Elena looked at him. You noticed the fence, she said. I notice working land, he said. It's different from land that's just sitting there. Yours is working. He let that land. Go clean up. I'll be here. She didn't know why she obeyed. She told herself it was purely practical, that she was owed nothing and risked nothing by having a conversation with a stranger, that it meant nothing about her to hear what he had to say. She went inside, washed her face and hands at the kitchen sink until the grime was gone, changed her work shirt for the plain gray one she kept on the peg inside the door. She didn't do anything else. She didn't have a mirror in the kitchen, and she didn't go find one. When she came back out, Rowan Hayes was standing in the yard alone. The foreman had retreated to the road. Gerald had taken Savannah inside. She could hear the low, urgent pitch of her father's voice through the window. Not the words, just the controlled fury. The neighbors had mostly dispersed, though she could feel the watching from windows and from the gap in Dottie Marsh's fence line. Better, she said. Fine, he said. He gestured to the old bench at the side of the house. You mind? They sat, not close. A respectful distance, the way you'd sit with someone you'd only just met, which they had. There was a beat of ordinary quiet. Then Rowan Hayes said, I'm not looking for a decorative wife, Miss Brooks. I want you to know that up front. My ranch has real problems, and I need a person who knows how to work through real problems. That's not an insult to anyone else, it's just what I need. Elena looked at her hands, clean now, but the calluses were still there, the small permanent marks of a decade of actual labor. You came to Red Hollow looking for that, she said. A wife who works. I came to this county because I need someone with practical capability, he said. I looked at 3 towns before this one. No one showed me what you showed me this morning. He paused. Frankly, they showed me what I expected. I didn't expect you. What did you expect? Savannah, probably, he said without cruelty. That's what people usually prepare. Elena almost laughed. Not amusement exactly, more the release of recognizing something true out loud for the first time. You're honest? She said. I try to be. It saves time. What are the real problems? She said. At your ranch. Something changed in his face, a kind of respect that was more meaningful than compliments, the recognition of a person asking the right question. The kind that don't look like problems from the outside, he said. The kind that have been building for years. Financial, some, and some older than that. She thought about what she'd heard from the grain suppliers and the equipment lenders, about the estate complications, about the lawyers and the buried agreements. She looked at him directly. And you think I can help with that? I think you might be able to, he said. I think you fix things by instinct. I think you've been doing it so long, it's just how you see the world. She was quiet for a moment. You don't know me, she said. No, he agreed. That's why I'm asking to. Inside the house, the argument had grown loud enough that she could hear it clearly now. Her father's voice. This is an embarrassment, Savannah. He's making a fool of us in front of the entire town. Savannah's voice controlled, but with a fracture in it. It doesn't make sense. She doesn't... look at what she was doing. She was fixing a pump. It doesn't matter what she was doing. The point is that Hayes came here too. Maybe he came here to do exactly what he said he did. That was a different voice. Elena recognized it as Loretta Voss, who was apparently still in the house. The sound of it calm, a little tired, like someone saying a thing they'd known for a long time, landed strangely. Silence inside briefly. Then her father, quieter and harder. "Nobody asked you, Loretta." Elena turned back to Rowan Hayes. He'd heard it too. He hadn't reacted with discomfort or apology. He just waited. "My father is going to make this complicated," she said. "Most things worth doing are complicated," he said. "He'll say you insulted him. He'll say you insulted Savannah. That wasn't my intention." "I know that," she said. "He won't care." Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, "What does he have claim to legally over your choices?" Something shifted in her chest, a tightening she recognized as the long compressed consequence of years of not being asked that question. "Nothing," she said. "I'm 24. I own my choices." "Good," he said. He said it simply, the way you say something that was never actually in question. "So what would you need from me if you were to consider this?" She looked at him. "You're asking what my terms are," she said. Yes. She'd never been asked that. Not once. Not by her father, not by anyone in this town who'd ever needed something from her hands or her time. She'd been directed and managed and ignored and overlooked, but never asked what she required in return. She thought about it seriously because it deserved seriousness. "I work," she said finally. "That's not negotiable. If I come to your ranch, I'm not a decoration and I'm not a guest. I have to be useful, actually useful, with real responsibility." "Agreed," he said immediately. "I make my own decisions about when I stay and when I leave. No contract that traps me." "I'm not interested in trapping anyone," he said. "I want that in writing." A pause. Then, "Fair. And my father gets nothing from this arrangement. If he comes to you with any kind of claim or debt, he's decided I owe him." "I'll handle it," Rowan said. She looked at him hard. "I don't want you handling it for me. I want it established from the start that whatever I choose to do is my choice, not a transaction he's profiting from." He met her eyes and held them. "Elena Brooks," he said, "you are the first person who sat across from me this year and told me what they actually wanted. Do you understand how rare that is?" She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. "I'll have a letter drawn up today," he said. "Whatever terms you state, it'll be in your name, not your father's, not anyone else's." She let that settle. Then the screen door banged open, and her father appeared on the porch. Gerald Brooks looked between his daughter and Rowan Hayes with an expression that had moved past confusion and landed somewhere darker, the particular fury of a man who'd arranged the world a certain way and found it rearranged without his permission. "Elena." His voice was very controlled. "Come inside." She didn't move. "Gerald," she said. "Go back inside yourself." The silence in the yard went absolutely still. Her father stared at her. He'd heard her disagree before, quietly, infrequently, always in private. He'd never heard her be this direct, and never in company. "You don't speak to me that way," he said. "I'm 24 years old," she said. "I've run your ranch for 4 years. I've gotten up before you every morning and I've fixed every broken thing on this property with my own hands. I've done it without complaint and without credit, and I'll keep doing it if that's what I choose." She paused. "But I don't need your permission to have a conversation with a man who asked to speak with me." Her father's face went through several colors. Rowan Hayes had not stood up. He had not moved. He was watching with the same calm attention he'd brought to the pump housing assessing, noting, not interfering. "You embarrass me," Gerald said, quietly, which was worse than if he'd shouted it. "I know," Elena said. "I've always embarrassed you. I've made peace with that." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Rowan Hayes. "My daughter," he said with terrible dignity, "doesn't understand the situation." "She understands it quite well," Rowan said pleasantly. "Better than most." Gerald turned and went back inside without another word. The screen door clicked shut behind him. Elena released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "You all right?" Rowan said. "Yes," she said. And it was true, she was shaking slightly the way you shake after finally setting down something heavy, but she was all right. By the time the sun had moved past noon, the letter had been drafted. Rowan's foreman, Cal Briggs, turned out to carry a portable writing kit in his saddlebag, not because he was a formal man, but because he traveled enough that he'd learned to be prepared. He produced a clean sheet of paper and a decent pen, and Rowan wrote in his own hand while Elena watched. She was allowed to read it before anything was agreed. She read it twice. The terms were exactly what she'd stated. Her name, her choices, her right to leave, a position of genuine working responsibility on the ranch manager of secondary operations, which was a formal title she hadn't expected. No transfer of debt. No claim from her father. The arrangement could be ended by either party with 30 days' notice, and if the arrangement developed into something of a more permanent nature, that would be a separate agreement, negotiated separately. "Is there anything missing?" he said. She looked up from the paper. "You left space," she said. She pointed to a gap below the stated terms. "For anything you want to add," he said. She took the pen. She wrote, "All decisions regarding my person, my time, and my future remain solely my own." She handed it back. He read it. He didn't blink. "Yes," he said, and he countersigned it. And she packed what she owned in 2 hours. It wasn't much work clothes. Her grandfather's folding knife, the small notebook where she'd been keeping records of the ranch's failing finances, her mother's photograph, a set of tools she'd paid for herself over 3 years from small savings her father hadn't known about. Savannah came to the doorway of her room while she was packing. Elena looked at her. Her sister's expression was complicated. Not simply hurt, not simply angry, something she couldn't entirely read. Savannah Brooks was 27 years old and had been told since she could understand language that she was the one who would save this family by being beautiful in the right place at the right time. Today, that story had not worked the way it was supposed to. "You planned this," Savannah said. "I didn't plan anything," Elena said. "I was fixing the pump. That's the same thing for you." Elena stopped packing and looked at her sister directly. "You can run this place," she said. "You know you can. You've watched me do it. I'll write everything down before I leave, where the systems are, what the problems are, what order to do things." Savannah's jaw tightened. "I don't want to run the ranch." "I know," Elena said. "I know you don't, but you can." She paused. "That's not nothing, Savannah. Knowing you can do something even when you'd rather not." Her sister looked at her for a long moment. There was something underneath the complicated expression, something tired and old, and she thought maybe a little relieved. Like someone who'd been carrying a performance for a long time and was starting to feel the weight of it. Savannah didn't say anything else. She turned and went back to her room. Elena finished packing. She carried her own bag out to the road. Her father was not on the porch when she left. The curtain in the front window moved, which meant he was watching, but he didn't come out. She didn't look for him. Cal Briggs took her bag without being asked and tied it to the spare horse. He had a quiet competence about him that she recognized the manner of someone who'd worked their whole life and respected work in others. "Hayes Ridge is about 4 hours east," he said. "Weather's going to hold." "Good," she said. Rowan Hayes was already mounted. He looked down at her with the same steady attention he'd had all morning. "Ready?" he said. She thought about the pump housing she'd repaired, the fence she'd restrung, the 4 years of mornings she'd gotten up before anyone else and done what needed to be done for a place that had never once looked at her as though she mattered. She thought about the letter folded in her inside pocket with her name on it. "Yes," she said. She mounted the horse. They rode out of Red Hollow in the early afternoon, and behind them the town whispered and gossiped and shook its head and wondered what on earth Rowan Hayes could be thinking. Elena didn't look back. She looked at the road ahead, the long flat road, with the western light coming over it, and something that felt like open air, real open air for the first time in years, and she kept her eyes forward. She had agreed to nothing except her own terms. And for a woman who had spent 24 years invisible, that felt like the only miracle she had ever needed. The road east was long, and Elena spent most of it in her own head. She was not a woman who talked to fill silence, and Rowan Hayes turned out not to be a man who required it. Cal Briggs rode a length behind them and said nothing at all, which she respected. The three of them moved at a steady pace, and the only sounds were the horses and the wind and the occasional dry creak of leather. About 2 hours in, Rowan said, "You're not nervous." "Should I be?" she said. "Most people would be. Most people haven't spent 4 years wondering how they're going to get the well pump through another winter on $30 and a piece of borrowed belt leather," she said. Perspective. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was quiet and brief, and she got the impression it surprised him slightly. "Fair," he said. They didn't talk much after that. But it was a different kind of silence than the one she'd grown up in, not hostile, not loaded with resentment. Just two people moving through the same space without needing to perform anything for each other. She found that she could breathe in it. That alone told her something. Hayes Ridge appeared before she was ready for it, which was its own kind of statement. She'd built a picture in her mind from what she'd heard Large Prosperous one of the finest operations in the territory, and the picture wasn't wrong exactly. But it didn't account for what she felt when she rode through the main gate and understood in the way you understand things through the body, rather than the mind, that this place had a problem underneath its surface, the way old wood had rot underneath its paint. It looked like strength. It moved like something bracing. She filed that away and kept her face even. The ranch hands who were working near the main yard looked up when they came through. She counted 7 visible, which meant more elsewhere. She noted the way they looked not at Rowan, not at Cal, but at her. The assessment was not unfriendly, but it was thorough. A new person on working land is a variable, and working people know how to read variables fast. One of them, a lean man in his 40s with a sun-damaged face, and the hands of someone who'd been at this since boyhood, stepped forward and nodded at Rowan. "Mr. Hayes, good trip." "Productive," Rowan said. He dismounted, handed his reins off. "This is Elena Brooks. She's taking on secondary operations management. Treat her accordingly." The man looked at Elena. She looked back without shifting. "Pete Garland," he said. Head hand. "Elena Brooks," she said. She didn't add anything. She didn't have to. Pete Garland gave her a second look, the kind that recalibrates. He nodded once, short and direct, and she knew that was the only welcome she was going to get, and that it was a real one. "I'll show you the quarters," Rowan said. "Show me the operation first," she said. He paused mid-step. She held his gaze. "I'll sleep anywhere. I'd rather know what I'm working with before I settle in." Another one of those brief, quiet sounds, not quite a laugh, but in that direction. He changed direction. "Pete," he said. "You mind?" "Not at all," Pete said, and there was something in his voice that she catalogued for later relief faint, but there like a man who'd been waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. Pete Garland walked her through the secondary operation in 45 minutes, and she asked questions the whole time. Not showy questions, not the kind designed to impress, practical questions, specific questions. The kind that only made sense if you already understood how a working ranch functioned at the ground level. Where does the water come from, and where does it go? What's the grazing rotation, and who manages the schedule? What's the condition of the north barn roof? She'd seen a sag in the ridgeline from the road, and she wanted to know if anyone else had noticed. What's the diesel situation? What's the feed contract, and when does it come up for renewal? Pete answered all of it. Directly, efficiently, with the occasional sideways glance that told her he was revising his opinion upward in real time. About halfway through, he said, "You done this before?" "My family's ranch in Red Hollow," she said. "Smaller operation, but the problems are mostly the same, regardless of scale." "What kind of problems?" "Deferred maintenance, financial decisions made for the wrong reasons, systems that work until they don't, and nobody who takes responsibility for knowing which ones are about to go." She paused. "The north barn roof, for example." Pete Garland stopped walking. He looked at her. Then he looked in the direction of the barn. "I've been telling Mr. Hayes about that roof for 8 months," he said. "He keeps saying he'll look at it." "What's it cost to fix?" "About $1,100 in materials, 2 weeks of labor." "What does it cost if it collapses in a wet winter?" He made a sound that was not amusement. "More than that. A lot more. We've got stored feet in there worth—" "Write it down," she said. "The full number. What the feet is worth, what the equipment under it is worth, what we lose if we have to move it last minute. Full number." He looked at her with that recalibrating look again. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She almost corrected the ma'am. She decided to leave it. Rowan was waiting by the main house when Pete brought her back. He had the particular stillness of a man who'd used his waiting time to think, rather than to fidget, which she was beginning to understand was characteristic of him. "Well," he said. She looked at Pete. Pete looked at her, then at Rowan. "She's going to want to see the books," he said. It wasn't a warning, it was a prediction. "I'm going to want to see the books," Elena confirmed. Rowan studied her for a moment. Then, "Come inside." The main house at Hayes Ridge was the first place in her life that Elena walked into, and felt the full weight of what she didn't know, not because it was grand, though it was larger than anything she'd lived in, but because it had the specific texture of a place that hadn't been properly managed in years. Fine things, poorly maintained. Good bones underneath a surface that had been allowed to slide. It felt, she thought, like the ranch exterior, like something bracing. Rowan took her to the office, a room with 2 walls of shelving and a desk that was buried under paper in a way that told her the filing system had stopped working sometime around 2 years ago, and nobody had rebuilt it. She stood in the doorway and looked at the desk. "Your father's estate," she said. "Yes," he said. He said it flatly without self-pity, but without pretending it was fine either. "How long did the lawyers take?" 14 months to declare the estate settled." He paused. "I'm not sure they got it right." She looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" He moved to the desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a folder that was thicker than most books. He held it out to her. She took it. She opened it. The first page was a summary document from an attorney named Caldwell Harlan. Caldwell of Caldwell and Associates out of Amarillo. The summary declared the Hayes estate settled and the outstanding debts resolved. The total figure was substantial. The resolution looked clean on paper. She turned to the second page, then the third. By the 5th page, she felt a specific sensation in her chest that she'd felt before once when she found a structural crack in the Brooks barn that went all the way through the foundation, and once when she realized her father had signed a loan agreement he hadn't told her about. The sensation of looking at damage that was deeper than it first appeared. "Who is Harlan Caldwell to your family?" she said. "He was my father's lawyer," Rowan said. "He handled the estate. Is he still your lawyer?" A pause. "He handles the ongoing legal matters for the ranch, yes." She looked up from the folder. Rowan was watching her with careful attention, the kind that knew something was coming and was choosing not to rush it. "These resolution figures," she said. "There are 3 creditor claims here that were settled for amounts that seem low. Very low given the original balances. Caldwell negotiated them down. Or they were settled on paper, but the actual obligation wasn't cleared," she said. "Which would mean the creditors could come back." Silence. "Do you have the original creditor agreements?" she said. "Somewhere in there," he said. She looked at the desk, at the 2 walls of shelving, at the folder in her hands. "I'm going to need more time with this than tonight," she said. "Take what you need," he said, and then quieter, "Elena." He waited until she looked at him. "Be honest with me. Whatever you find." "That's the only way I know how to be," she said. She found the housekeeper a compact, direct woman named Marta, who'd been at Hayes Ridge for 11 years and had the air of someone who'd watched the place deteriorate, with the helpless grief of someone who couldn't stop it. Marta showed her to a room on the second floor, plain and decent, with a window that overlooked the east yard. Elena set her bag on the floor and didn't unpack it. She went back to the office. She worked until 2 in the morning. Nay, what she found in those hours was not a surprise exactly. It was more like the confirmation of a suspicion that had arrived the moment she read that summary document. But confirmation is its own thing. Confirmation has weight that suspicion doesn't. The first thing Harlan Caldwell had negotiated the estate debts, yes. But she found buried in a stack of papers that had been filed out of order and probably never cross-referenced an original agreement between William Hayes and a land trust called the Meridian Group. The agreement, dated 5 years before William Hayes's death, granted the Meridian Group right of first purchase on 4,300 acres of the Northern Range if the Hayes estate ever came under financial pressure. That agreement had not appeared in the estate settlement. She read it twice to make sure she understood it. Then she set it carefully to one side and kept looking. The second thing, 3 of the resolved creditor claims had been settled by Caldwell for figures that were indeed suspiciously low. When she found the original loan documents and did the arithmetic herself, the discrepancy was not small. The gap between what the loans should have resolved for and what Caldwell had settled them for totaled somewhere north of $60,000. The money had to have gone somewhere. She sat with that number for a long time. The third thing, and this was the one that made her get up and stand at the window for several minutes, was that Harlan Caldwell was listed in a separate internal document as a paid consultant to the Meridian Group. He was working for both sides. Had been apparently for years. She stood at the window and looked out at the east yard and the dark shape of the barn roof against the night sky. She thought about Rowan Hayes, who had taken over this ranch at 29 and spent 4 years trying to hold it together without knowing what was eating it from the inside. She thought about what it would feel like to do that, to work that hard against a damage you didn't know existed. She knew something about that. She went back to the desk and kept working. She was still at the desk when the light under the office door shifted, and Rowan Hayes pushed it open at 6:30 in the morning. He stopped in the doorway. She'd organized the desk while she worked, not as a performance of competence, but because she couldn't think through disorder, so everything had been sorted and stacked, and the relevant documents separated into 3 groups, each weighted with a different object from the pen cup, so they wouldn't get mixed back together. He looked at the desk, then at her. "You haven't slept," he said. "No." He came in and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. He stood on the other side of the desk and looked at the 3 stacks. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it. The Meridian Group agreement, the settlement discrepancies, Caldwell's dual role. She laid it out plainly in order without softening any of it. She watched his face while she talked, and his face went through something difficult. Not shock, because some part of him had sensed that something was wrong, but the particular expression of a man who'd suspected and been confirmed simultaneously, which is harder than simple shock, because there's nowhere to deflect the understanding. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. $60,000, he said. That's my estimate based on the original documents. I could be off by some margin, but not by much. And the land, 4,300 acres. The agreement is dated before your father died, which means it was a valid contract your father entered. The question is whether it was disclosed to you, and whether it appears in the estate settlement. She paused. It doesn't appear in the estate settlement, which means either Caldwell missed it, which is negligence, or Caldwell hid it, which is fraud. Another long silence. He's still my lawyer, Rowan said. I know. He handled everything after my father died. The estate, the creditor negotiations, the ongoing ranch contracts. I know, she said again. And then carefully, do you have a relationship with him beyond the legal work? Is he a friend of the family? Rowan looked at her with something complicated. He and my father were close. He came to the funeral. He stopped. I trusted him, he said, because my father trusted him. The flatness with which he said it told her everything about how that sentence felt coming out. She didn't fill the silence. She let him sit in it. He put both hands on the desk and looked at the 3 stacks of paper. Then he looked at the Meridian Group agreement she'd placed on top of the center stack right on top, so it would be the first thing anyone saw. "Who else knows about this?" he said. "No one," she said. "I found it last night. You're the first person I've told." He looked at her. "You could have waited, brought it to me more gently." "You asked me to be honest," she said. "That's not compatible with waiting." Something moved through his expression, the complicated recognition of a man who'd asked for something difficult and received exactly that. "What do we do?" he said. And the fact that he said, "We," not "what do I do," not "what should I do." But we immediately, without thinking about it, did something small and significant in her chest that she didn't have time to examine right now. "First," she said, "you stop sharing any ranch information with Caldwell until we understand the full scope of what he's done. Don't tell him you know anything." Agreed. Second, you need a different attorney. Someone with no connection to Caldwell, no connection to the Meridian Group. Someone who practices land and estate law. "I know a man in Austin," he said slowly. "James Whitfield. My father didn't like him because he was too direct. My father preferred—" He stopped. "My father preferred people who made things sound smoother than they were." "Whitfield sounds right," she said. "Third," he said. "Third, we get the Meridian Group agreement in front of Whitfield immediately and find out whether that land claim is still actionable. Whether the agreement can be challenged. How much time we have." She paused. "How much land is the Northern Range worth, Rowan?" It was the first time she'd used his first name, and she hadn't planned it. It came out because she was tired and direct, and they'd been working toward the same thing for the last several minutes, and formality felt wrong suddenly. He didn't react to it, except in a way that was barely perceptible, a slight settling like something aligning. "The water rights alone," he said, "are worth more than the ranch's debt." She nodded. So that was what the Meridian Group wanted. "Then we move fast," she said. The conversation with Pete Garland that morning was short and pointed. Elena had slept 2 hours and changed her shirt and was back in the yard by 8. Pete had the look of a man who'd arrived at work to find that the landscape had shifted overnight, which it had. "I need the maintenance records for the last 3 years," she said. "Everything. Equipment, structural, water systems." "What are you looking for?" he said. "I'll know when I see it," she said. "Also, anyone on this property who's been here more than 5 years who knew William Hayes, who might know about any arrangements the old man made that aren't in the main records." Pete looked at her carefully. "That's an interesting question." "It's a necessary one." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's a woman named June Paris. She was William Hayes's bookkeeper for the last 8 years of his life. Caldwell let her go when he took over the estate administration. She lives about 6 miles east, has a small place out there." Something moved quick and sharp through Elena's awareness. "Caldwell let her go. Day after the funeral," Pete said. I always thought it was fast." "It was fast," Elena said. "I need to speak with her." "I figured you might," Pete said. He'd already written down an address. "Okay." Rowan drove her out to June Paris's place that afternoon. He didn't ask why she wanted him there, rather than going alone. He seemed to understand, or at least to trust her instinct about it, which was its own form of communication she was still getting used to. June Paris was 61 slight, with the precise posture of someone who'd spent decades at a desk and the sharp eyes of a woman who forgot nothing. She opened the door and looked at Rowan Hayes, and her expression went through 3 things in quick succession: recognition, grief, and something that might have been relief. "I wondered when someone would come," she said. She let them in. She made coffee without asking whether they wanted it, which told Elena something about her, and sat across the kitchen table with her hands folded in a way that looked calm, and wasn't. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I'm sorry about your father. I should have written. I didn't know what to say." "It's all right, June." he said, quietly. She looked at Elena. "And you are?" "Elena Brooks," Elena said. "I'm working with Rowan on the ranch management. I found some documents last night that I have questions about." June Paris looked at her hands. "The Meridian Group Agreement," Elena said. June closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were very steady. "I didn't know what to do," she said. "After they let me go. After Caldwell, I didn't know what was the right thing. I told myself William had made that agreement himself, that maybe he had reasons I didn't know about. I told myself it was settled." "Did you know about the creditor settlements?" Elena said. "The figures Caldwell resolved the debts for." June looked at her steadily. "I knew the original balances," she said. "I know what they should have settled for." She paused. "I know what they didn't." "Do you have records?" Elena said. "Personal copies. Anything you kept from when you were bookkeeper." June Paris stood up without a word. She went to the back room. She came back with a box. She set it on the table between them. It was a full box. Rowan Hayes looked at it and then looked at June and said with careful control, "You kept all of this." "I kept all of this," June said, "because I knew something wasn't right, and I didn't know who to bring it to." She looked at him directly. "I'm glad someone finally came." They were back at Hayes Ridge by late afternoon with the box. Elena and Rowan sat across from each other at the office desk, cleared now functional, the 3 stacks rearranged to accommodate the new material, and went through what June had given them together. It took 3 hours. By the end of it, the picture was complete enough to act on. Not complete in every detail, there were things that would require Whitfield's legal expertise and probably a formal investigation to fully establish, but complete enough. The Meridian Group Agreement, the settlement discrepancies Caldwell's consulting arrangement, and now June's records showing the original numbers and the original state of the accounts before Caldwell's administration. Caldwell had spent 4 years quietly positioning the Meridian Group to claim the Northern Range. He'd buried the agreement in the estate documentation, settled the debts at deflated figures, and taken the difference, and waited for the right moment, probably a moment of financial stress, which he'd helped engineer to surface the land claim. Hayes Ridge was 14,000 acres. Without the Northern Range, without the water rights, it was less than half what it was. Rowan sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Elena led him. "My father trusted him," he said again. "Your father may not have understood fully what he was signing," she said. "The Meridian Group Agreement has language in it that's deliberately technical. It reads like a routine right of first refusal clause until you get to the trigger conditions." "And what are the trigger conditions?" "Financial distress," she said. "Specifically, if the estate carries unresolved debt past 18 months, the right of first purchase activates." He looked at her. "The estate settlement was declared at 14 months, she said. 4 months inside the window. So Caldwell settled the estate fast enough to avoid triggering the clause," he said slowly. "Settled it on paper," she said. "But the settlements he negotiated may not fully clear the debt legally, which means the creditors could potentially reopen the claims, and if they do, and the estate is found to be technically in ongoing distress past 18 months. The Meridian Group gets the land." "That's the theory," she said. "Whitfield will need to assess whether it holds legally, but yes." He was quiet again. She watched him process it, the full scope of it, what it meant, how long it had been in motion. 4 years. Maybe longer. "He was at my father's funeral," Rowan said. "He shook my hand. He told me he'd take care of everything." Elena didn't answer that. There was no answer she could give that was worth anything, and she knew better than to try. After a moment, Rowan looked at her. His expression had gone through the grief and the anger and arrived somewhere harder and quieter and more purposeful. "Whitfield," he said. "First thing tomorrow," she said. "Can you draft the summary, what we have organized for a legal review?" "Tonight," she said. "Elena." He said it differently than he'd said it before. Not sharply, not urgently, just with a directness that asked her to actually stop and hear it. You've been awake for over 30 hours. She met his eyes. I've slept less and worked harder, she said. I know, he said. That's what worries me. She held his gaze for a moment. Something in the simplicity of that, the fact that he'd said, worried plainly, without disguising it as a management concern, reached somewhere she wasn't prepared to defend. I'll eat something first, she said. Good, he said, and he went to tell Marta. She drafted the summary after dinner at the kitchen table, which felt less formal and easier to think at than the office desk, and Marta brought coffee at 9 without being asked, and set it at her elbow and said nothing. Elena drank it and kept writing. The summary was clean, factual, organized, the kind of document that made the case through evidence rather than argument, the kind that a good lawyer could pick up and understand within 10 minutes. She wrote it the way she fixed things methodically, starting from the foundation and working up. She was almost finished when she heard footsteps, and Rowan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the papers spread across the table, and the mostly empty coffee cup, and her. How much more, he said. 20 minutes. He came in and sat down across from her. Not to supervise, just to be in the room. He poured himself the last of the coffee, and drank it in silence, while she wrote the final pages. She finished. She set the pen down. He picked up the summary and read it. She watched his face while he did the careful attention, the occasional pause at a significant line, the slight tightening around his jaw at the parts that confirmed the worst of it. He finished. He set it down. This is good work, he said. It's accurate work, she said. Whether it's good depends on what Whitfield can do with it. It's both, he said. She looked at him across the kitchen table in the late-night quiet of the house, and for the first time since she'd ridden through the gate yesterday, she felt something that wasn't urgency or adrenaline or the focused intensity of a problem being solved. It was something slower and more uncertain, and she didn't have a ready name for it. She looked away first. Get some sleep, he said. We leave for Austin at 7. She nodded and gathered the papers and went upstairs. She lay in the dark for a long time before sleep came. The box from June Paris sat on the floor by her bag, and somewhere in this house, a man was reckoning with 4 years of being quietly betrayed by someone he'd trusted, and tomorrow they were going to start fighting it. She stared at the ceiling and thought, this is what you came here to do. This is exactly the kind of problem you know how to work through. But there was something underneath that thought. A smaller, quieter thing she didn't examine too closely, that said this was also the first time in her adult life she'd fallen asleep somewhere and felt, however cautiously, like she was supposed to be there. She closed her eyes and slept hard and dreamlessly, with one hand resting on the folded summary that might save 14,000 acres from a man who'd spent years pretending to be trustworthy. Tomorrow, the work would continue. She was ready for it. They left for Austin at 7 as planned. Cal Briggs drove. Elena sat in the back with the summary document in her lap and the box from June Paris at her feet, and Rowan sat beside her with his hat on his knee and his jaw set at an angle that told her he hadn't slept much either. Nobody talked for the first hour. The silence between them had changed again overnight. It had a different texture now, the kind that comes from two people who have looked at the same difficult thing together and can't unsee it. She went over the summary one more time in her head. Checked the logic. Checked the sequence of the evidence. She had the instinct trained by years of fixing things alone to doubt her own conclusions when they were serious, not because she lacked confidence, but because serious conclusions deserved the scrutiny. She gave it that. The conclusions held. Harlan Caldwell had been running both sides of the Hayes estate for years. The fraud was not careless. It was patient architectural, the kind built by someone who understood how inattention compounds over time. He'd known that a grieving son taking over a complicated ranch at 29 would be overwhelmed. He'd counted on it. He'd made himself indispensable in exactly the moment when Rowan had no capacity to question him. It was, she thought, one of the cruelest kinds of theft. Not brutal, not sudden, just slow and quiet and built on trust. "You're going through it again," Rowan said. She looked up. He was watching her, not intrusive, just aware. "I want to be certain," she said. "You were certain last night." "I want to still be certain this morning." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, as if that made sense to him, and looked back out the window. It did make sense. That was the thing she was still adjusting to, that when she explained how her mind worked, he didn't push back or reassure her unnecessarily. He just absorbed it and accepted it as information. She wasn't used to that. James Whitfield's office was on the third floor of a building in downtown Austin that smelled like old books and serious money, which was a combination Elena associated with people who had more power than they advertised. The receptionist showed them in without making them wait, which told her Rowan had called ahead and Whitfield had understood it was urgent. Whitfield himself was in his 60s, compact with the economy of movement of a man who'd spent decades not wasting energy on anything that didn't matter. He shook Rowan's hand and then looked at Elena with the direct evaluating gaze of a man who categorized people fast. "This is Elena Brooks," Rowan said. "She found what we're here about." Whitfield looked at her for one more second. Then, "Sit down, tell me." She told him. She laid it out the same way she'd written the summary, factual, sequenced evidence first. She put the relevant documents in front of him as she went. He read each one without interrupting her, which she appreciated. A man who interrupted during evidence presentation was a man who thought his hypotheses mattered more than facts, and she'd dealt with enough of those. When she finished, Whitfield sat back and was quiet for almost a full minute. Elena let him think. Rowan let him think. Then Whitfield said, "How long were you in the office before you found the Meridian Agreement?" "About 2 hours," she said. He looked at her over his reading glasses. "And Caldwell administered that office for 4 years and claims he never found it." "That's what the estate settlement implies," she said. "It's not plausible," Whitfield said. "It wasn't a question." "No," she said. "It's not." Whitfield looked at Rowan. "How much do you trust the woman who kept the original books, June Paris?" "Completely," Rowan said. "She worked for my father for 8 years. She has no motive to fabricate anything. If anything, she's been sitting on this information for 4 years, afraid to come forward." "Why afraid?" "Caldwell let her go the day after the funeral," Elena said. "She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know who to trust with it. She wasn't sure anyone would listen." Whitfield looked in the box of June's records. "These are original documents, not copies." "Originals," Elena said. "Ledger's correspondence account records, in her handwriting with dates." Another silence. Then Whitfield put both hands flat on the desk and said, "All right, here is what you're dealing with." He talked for 40 minutes. The legal picture as Whitfield drew it was serious, but not hopeless. A distinction that Elena understood meant a great deal of work ahead. The Meridian Group agreement was legally valid as a contract William Hayes had entered. That couldn't be undone. What could potentially be challenged was the estate settlement process itself, specifically whether Caldwell's dual role as estate administrator and paid Meridian Group consultant constituted a conflict of interest that voided or compromised his administration of the estate. If the settlement process was found to be compromised, it could be reopened. And if it was reopened, the Meridian Group's ability to invoke the land claim, which depended on the settlement having left certain debts technically unresolved, collapsed. "The 18-month trigger," Elena said. Whitfield pointed at her. "Exactly. If we can demonstrate that Caldwell deliberately structured the settlement to appear resolved on paper while leaving sufficient legal ambiguity to allow the Meridian Group to invoke later, that's not just malpractice. That's fraud, potentially criminal fraud." Rowan had been very still throughout this. Now he said, "How do we demonstrate that?" "With what you've brought me," Whitfield said. "June Paris's records, the Meridian Consulting Agreement, the settlement discrepancy figures. It's a strong foundation." He paused. "It's not a guarantee. Caldwell is sophisticated. He'll have explanations for every piece of this individually." "But together," Elena said. "Together it's a pattern," Whitfield said. "And patterns are harder to explain away." He looked at her directly. You said you estimated the settlement discrepancy at over $60,000. Based on the original loan documents and the settled figures, yes. The math is straightforward. I'll need to verify it. I have the worksheet, she said, and pulled it from the folder. He took it. He looked at it. His expression didn't change, but something in his stillness shifted slightly, the way a person's stillness shifts when they're looking at something more significant than they expected. You did this last night, he said. Yes. In one sitting. It's not complicated arithmetic, she said. The complication is in how the numbers were arranged to obscure it, not in the numbers themselves. Whitfield looked at Rowan. Where did you find her? Red Hollow, Rowan said. She was fixing a pump. Whitfield made a sound that was not quite a laugh but contained one. He set the worksheet down carefully. I'm going to need 2 weeks, he said. I want to go through June Paris's records myself. I want to verify the figures. And I want to research the Meridian Group independently, who's behind it, whether there are other properties they've acquired this way. Elena looked up sharply. You think this isn't the first time? I think a fraud this carefully constructed doesn't get invented for one property, Whitfield said. He said it the way you say things that are obvious in retrospect. I think Caldwell, and whoever is behind the Meridian Group, have done this before, possibly multiple times. If I can find another case, another family that lost land or settled an estate under Caldwell's administration, under suspicious circumstances, that pattern becomes prosecution-level evidence. The room was quiet. Rowan said low and controlled. He came to my father's funeral. I know, Whitfield said, not dismissively, with the specific gravity of a man who'd heard those words before from people in those circumstances and knew exactly what they cost. They were back on the road by noon. The return drive was different from the morning. The silence had a different quality, less contained, more unsettled. Whitfield's news had done what good legal counsel does, clarified the situation without resolving it, which meant they now understood clearly how serious things were and how uncertain the outcome remained. Elena watched the road and turned the 2 weeks over in her mind. 2 weeks in which Caldwell didn't know what they knew. 2 weeks in which they had to function as if nothing had changed while Whitfield built the case. 2 weeks in which the ranch still had to operate the north barn roof, still needed to be addressed, and Pete Garland's 8 months of deferred concerns still needed working through. 2 weeks in which Harlan Caldwell, if he somehow got wind of any of this, could accelerate whatever he was planning. He'll find out eventually, she said. Rowan turned from the window. Caldwell. He has to. Even if we're careful, once Whitfield starts pulling records and researching the Meridian Group, there's a trail. People talk. She looked at him. When he finds out, what does he do? Rowan thought about it seriously, which was the right response. He accelerates, he said. He finds a reason to surface the land claim before Whitfield can challenge the settlement. He needs a trigger, she said. The agreement specifies financial distress. The ranch has debt, Rowan said. Not defensively, practically. How much and to whom? He told her. It was not a comfortable number, but it wasn't catastrophic either, not at the current level. The dangerous territory was if a creditor called in a note unexpectedly. If the ranch suddenly appeared to be in acute distress. Could he get to any of the current creditors? She said. Rowan's jaw tightened. The primary note is through First Territorial Bank in Amarillo. The manager there, Harold Fitch, he knew my father. He knew Caldwell. Has Fitch been cooperative with you? He's been neutral, Rowan said carefully. He always has a reason to delay things. Payments process slowly. Correspondence takes longer than it should. Elena looked at him. Rowan, Fitch might be part of it. The silence that followed was the kind that fills up with rearranging. If Fitch and Caldwell are coordinating, Rowan said slowly, then Fitch could call the note. Technically, any justification or none at all banks have broad discretion. If he calls the note and the ranch can't pay immediately, the estate is in distress within the meaning of the agreement. And the Meridian Group invokes. Yes. Another silence. How long do we have on the note before the next review? She said. 6 weeks. We have 4 weeks of margin, she said. Assuming Whitfield uses his 2 weeks well, and we can begin a legal challenge before the 6-week mark. 4 weeks, he repeated. It's enough, she said. If we move correctly. He looked at her steadily. You're not frightened by this. I'm concerned by it, she said. Frightened doesn't help. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to the road, and she heard him exhale slow, controlled the breath of a man putting something down that he'd been carrying for too long by himself. Tell me what we do, he said. Back at the ranch, she went straight to Pete Garland. She didn't tell him about Caldwell or the legal situation that needed to stay contained until Whitfield was further along. But she told him enough. She told him she needed a full operational report. Every system, every piece of equipment, every outstanding maintenance issue, organized by urgency and cost. She told him she needed it in writing, and she needed it in 2 days. Pete looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of respect, direct, unsurprised, quietly relieved. I've been wanting to put that together for 3 years, he said. Nobody ever asked for it. I'm asking, she said. 2 days. He nodded and went to work. She spent the rest of the afternoon with Marta going through the household accounts. This was territory she hadn't touched yet, and Marta had kept meticulous records which told her something important about the woman's character. The household ran lean and sensibly. There was no waste here. Whatever the ranch's financial complications, they weren't coming from the inside. You've managed this well, Elena told her. Marta looked at her with the careful expression of someone not accustomed to being assessed directly. I try, she said. You've done more than try, Elena said. I'm going to need your help over the next month. Things are going to be moving fast. Marta looked at her steadily. Is the ranch in trouble? Elena considered how much to say. The ranch has some things that need resolving, she said. We're resolving them. Marta absorbed this. William Hayes was a good man, she said quietly. He deserved better than what happened after. Elena paused. What do you mean? After he died, Marta said. Things changed fast. People who'd been around a long time suddenly weren't. People who hadn't been around started appearing. She looked at her hands. That lawyer. He was here a great deal, more than seemed necessary. Caldwell. He made me uncomfortable, Marta said plainly. I don't have a better way to say it. He was always very pleasant, and he always made me uncomfortable. That's a better way to say it than you think, Elena said. Did he ever ask you things about the house, the records, anything like that? Once, Marta said. About 6 months after William died. He asked me if William kept any personal files in the house, outside of the office. I told him I didn't know. He was very pleasant about it. Elena went very still. Did William keep personal files outside the office? She said carefully. Marta looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood up and said, Follow me. The room at the end of the upstairs hall had been William Hayes's private study. Smaller than the office, rarely used, the kind of space a man retreats to when he wants to think rather than work. Marta had kept it clean. She'd kept it exactly as it was. She opened the closet. On the floor underneath a wool blanket was a small trunk. Elena crouched and opened it. Inside were 4 leather-bound journals and a folded sheaf of correspondence tied with twine. She looked at Marta. I didn't know what was in them, Marta said. I knew they were private. After William died, I thought about giving them to Mr. Hayes to Rowan, but things moved so fast and Caldwell was always present, and I... She stopped. I kept them safe, she said. That was all I knew how to do. Elena stood up with the trunk. You kept them very safe, she said. Thank you, Marta. She brought the trunk to Rowan. He was in the office when she came in, going through correspondence with the focused grimness of a man who was looking for more trouble he hadn't found yet. He looked up when she set the trunk on the desk. She told him where it had come from. She watched his face while she talked the way it went still, when she mentioned his father's private study, the way something complicated moved through it when she described Marta keeping the trunk hidden. He looked at the trunk for a moment without touching it. Then he opened it. He read the journals in silence. Elena sat across from him and didn't rush him. She watched the light change as time passed, and she watched his face, and she read him the way she read structural things, looking for what was load-bearing, what was under strain, where the cracks were. She was learning a man with more interior than he showed. He'd built significant control over his own reactions. Not coldness, not suppression. Exactly more like the habit of a person who'd grown up in a place where emotional expression was treated as weakness and had made the rational adaptation. The control was good, but underneath it she could see the real thing moving. He read for over an hour. When he put the last journal down, he sat back and looked at the ceiling. He knew, Rowan said. Elena waited. He knew something was wrong with Caldwell, Rowan said. He writes about it here about 18 months before he died. He says he thinks Caldwell has interests that conflict with the ranch's interests, but he can't prove it. He stopped. He didn't know about the Meridian Group specifically. He couldn't see the whole thing, but he felt it. Another pause, and this one had something ragged in it. He felt it, and he didn't know how to... He stopped again. She gave him the silence. He should have told me, Rowan said, and the pain in that was real and direct and not performed. He probably thought he had time, she said. He probably thought he'd figure it out himself first. He was like that, Rowan said. He handled things alone. You do too, she said, not as a criticism. He looked at her. Something in his face, the controlled surface of it, shifted slightly. I did, he said. I'm trying to do something different. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she reached for the sheaf of correspondence. Can I look? He pushed it toward her. The correspondence was even more valuable than the journals. It was a series of letters between William Hayes and a man named Thomas Reeve, a business associate in Fort Worth. Someone Elena hadn't encountered in any of the other documents. The letters spanned the last 2 years of William's life. They were personal, informal, the kind written between men who'd known each other a long time. And buried in them across 3 letters, dated in the final year of William's life, was a thread she almost missed. William had been approached by the Meridian Group directly. Not through Caldwell directly. A representative had come to Hayes Ridge and proposed what they called a partnership arrangement on the Northern Range water rights. William had refused, firmly from the tone of it. He'd written to Reeve about it because he was suspicious of the approach and wanted a second opinion. Reeve's response advised caution, but not alarm. William's final letter on the subject said simply, Caldwell handled the men when they came again last week. He says he's dealt with it. I hope that's true, but I can't say I'm fully satisfied. She put the letter down on the desk with her hand flat on it. Rowan, she said. He leaned forward and read it. He was very quiet for a long time. Caldwell didn't deal with them, Rowan said. He joined them. Yes, she said. They came to my father refused, and Caldwell used the moment to get himself on the inside of the deal. That's what it looks like. His jaw was set so hard she could see the line of it from across the desk. He sat in this house, he said. He came to dinner. He told me after my father died he sat across from me and told me my father had been a brilliant man. He stopped. He told me how much my father had trusted him. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would be worth the air it took. I want to destroy him, Rowan said, quietly, without heat, which was worse somehow than if he'd said it loudly. You're going to, she said. But correctly. Whitfield's way, through the court. He looked at her. Because if you do it incorrectly, she said, he walks away. If you do it correctly, he doesn't. He held her gaze. Then he nodded once, short and sharp. The letters go to Whitfield, she said. Today, he agreed. She drafted the writer to Whitfield's brief that afternoon, a supplemental document outlining the new evidence, the Reeve correspondent's William Hayes's own written account of the Meridian Group's direct approach, and Caldwell's subsequent involvement. She wrote fast because the situation was accelerating in her mind, whether she wanted it to or not. The Meridian Group had been circling Hayes Ridge for at least 3 years before William died. Caldwell had been their instrument for at least that long. Every day they waited was a day the other side had more time to prepare a countermove. She sent it to Whitfield by courier at 5 o'clock. His reply came back in 2 hours. This changes the timeline. I need the letters by tomorrow morning. Come prepared for a longer meeting. She showed Rowan the message. Tomorrow, he said. Not a question. Leave at 6, she said. It'll be a longer day. He looked at her with an expression she was having increasing difficulty categorizing. It wasn't gratitude exactly, though it contained that. It was closer to the specific look of a man who'd been alone with a heavy thing for a long time, and had just become genuinely not alone with it. Elena, he said. She waited. I brought you here because I thought you could fix things, he said. Physical things, operational things. I thought that's what I needed. It's what you said you needed, she said carefully. I know what I said. He paused. I didn't know. He stopped, started again. I didn't anticipate this. The legal situation, she said. You, he said. The word landed very simply and very directly, and she felt it the way you feel, a shift in temperature, sudden total impossible to ignore. She looked at him steadily. I'm doing what needs to be done, she said. I know that, he said. That's not what I mean. She knew it wasn't what he meant. She was choosing to receive it as if it were because the alternative was to receive it as what it actually was, and she wasn't ready for that yet. She was a woman who'd spent 24 years invisible. She didn't know how to be seen without flinching. 6 o'clock, she said. Get some sleep. She left the office before he could say anything else. She did not sleep well. She lay in her room and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling around her, the particular creaks and murmurs of a large place breathing at night, and she thought about Rowan Hayes sitting in that office alone with his father's journals and the weight of 4 years of quiet betrayal. She thought about what it cost to trust someone and have that trust become the mechanism of your harm. She thought about her father, too, which she hadn't let herself do much since she left Red Hollow. Gerald Brooks was not a villain, that was the complicated truth she'd been carrying for years. He was a man who'd let grief and failure turn him inward and made his daughters pay the price of his smallness. He wasn't Caldwell. He hadn't deliberately engineered anyone's ruin. He'd just neglected, dismissed, failed to see. She thought about Savannah standing in the doorway of her room, saying, "It doesn't make sense." She was fixing a pump, and she thought about the tired thing she'd seen under her sister's expression before she left. She thought about Rowan saying, "I didn't anticipate you." She pressed her hands flat against the blanket and made herself breathe evenly. She was here to work. She was here because she was capable and the work needed doing. Whatever else was accumulating in the space between them, whatever that weight was, that warmth, that increasingly difficult to ignore quality of his attention, when he looked at her, she was not going to let it become a reason to stop thinking clearly. She was not going to become indispensable through feeling. She was going to earn her place through what she actually was. She knew the difference. She'd always known the difference. She turned on her side and closed her eyes and made herself sleep. The second Austin meeting was longer and harder. Whitfield had used the overnight hours well, she could tell from the state of his desk, which had the organized disorder of a man who'd been working since early morning. He had 3 associates in the room with him, which he hadn't had the first time, which told her he'd already escalated the matter internally. He'd also found something new. He told them before they'd fully settled into their chairs, which told her it was significant enough not to wait for pleasantries. I started pulling records on the Meridian Group last night, he said. It's a land trust incorporated in New Mexico, which creates some jurisdictional complexity, but the principles are traceable. There are 4 of them. He put a sheet of paper on the desk. 3 are investment men from Dallas. The 4th is Harlan Caldwell, Elena had suspected this. She'd suspected it since she first saw the consulting agreement. But hearing it stated as confirmed fact was still a different thing. Rowan picked up the paper. He read it. He set it down. "He's a principal," Rowan said. "Not a consultant, a principal." "He owns a 22% interest in the Meridian Group," Whitfield said. "Has since its incorporation, which was 7 years ago." He paused for emphasis. 2 years before your father died." The implication settled over the room. 7 years ago, Harlan Caldwell had taken a stake in an entity designed to acquire water rights-bearing ranch land. 2 years later, William Hayes died, and Caldwell administered the estate he'd spent years positioning to be vulnerable. "This is premeditated," Elena said. "Not surprised, just naming it clearly. Over a very long timeline," Whitfield said. "Which is both worse and better worse because of the deliberateness, better because long schemes leave more evidence." He looked at his associates briefly. "We've also found a property in Lubbock County, a ranch family named Alderton. They sold their northern range to the Meridian Group 3 years ago under what they described as financial pressure. The sale came after their estate the father had died was administered by Harlan Caldwell." Silence. Rowan said very carefully, "He did it before." "To the Aldertons," Whitfield said. "We're looking for others." Elena's mind was already moving through the implications. If there was a pattern provable documented more than one victim, the legal case went from estate fraud to something larger, something that carried real criminal exposure for everyone involved. "The Alderton family," she said. "Do they know they may have been defrauded?" "They know they lost land they didn't want to lose," Whitfield said. "Whether they've connected it to Caldwell, I don't know. I'm going to contact their current attorney today." "If they'll cooperate," Rowan said. "If they'll cooperate, we have a pattern that a territorial court can't dismiss as a single bad actor making mistakes." Whitfield let that land. "We have a conspiracy." The word sat in the room like a physical thing. Elena looked at Rowan. He was looking at the paper with Caldwell's name on it, at the word principal beside it, with the contained, still fury of a man who'd decided something and wasn't going to be moved from it. "What do we need to do," she said, "to make sure he can't accelerate the timeline before you're ready?" Whitfield looked at her with appreciation that was professional rather than personal. "That's the right question," he said. "And the answer involves making sure the ranch's financial position appears as stable as possible. Any vulnerability he can point to, any missed payment, any outstanding obligation that could be characterized as distress he'll use." "The note at First Territorial," she said. "Harold Fitch." Whitfield's expression shifted just slightly. "You know about Fitch." "I guessed about Fitch," she said. "Do you know something?" "I know that Harold Fitch's name appears in the Meridian Group's internal correspondence," Whitfield said, "as a cooperative regional contact." He paused. "That's their language, not mine." Rowan stood up from his chair. It was the first time in either meeting that he'd moved with that quality contained, but with something underneath it that had run out of room. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room for a long moment. Nobody spoke. Then he turned around. His face was entirely controlled, which she was learning meant the opposite of what it looked like. "Harold Fitch," he said, "personally attended my father's funeral. He gave a speech about William Hayes's contribution to the community." He stopped. "He cried?" Whitfield said nothing. There was nothing to say. Rowan looked at Elena. She met his eyes without looking away. "We move the note," she said, "before Fitch can act on it. We find a different lender, someone with no connection to Caldwell or the Meridian Group, and we refinance." "On what timeline?" Rowan said. "As fast as Whitfield tells us we need to," she said. She looked at Whitfield. "How long do we have before Fitch becomes a risk?" "If Caldwell knows something is moving, days," Whitfield said. "If he doesn't yet, you have more time. But I wouldn't bank on weeks." "Then we move this week," she said. Rowan looked at her and then at Whitfield. "Can you recommend a lender?" "I can do better than recommend one," Whitfield said. "I can make a call this afternoon." "Make it," Rowan said. "Yeah." They drove back in this early evening with more clarity and more urgency than they'd arrived with, which was the nature of the situation. Every answer generated more necessary action. Elena had a list forming in her head that she'd write down the moment they got back. Lender contact, refinancing documentation, ranch, financial summary for the new bank, all of it clean and clear and ready to move. She was thinking through the sequence when Rowan said, "How are you not exhausted?" She looked at him. "I am exhausted." "You don't show it." "I show it when there's time," she said. "There isn't time yet." He studied her in the fading light. "When this is resolved," he said slowly, "what do you want for yourself?" She looked at him for a moment. "To still be here," she said. And she meant it. Simply meant the ranch, the work, the thing they were building together through days like this one. But she heard the other layer of it as soon as she said it, and she knew from the way he went very still that he heard it too. She looked back at the road ahead. "Let's get home," she said. He didn't answer. But she felt him turn to look at her one more time before he turned back to the window, and she felt what that look contained even without seeing it. And she filed it in the place she was keeping all the things she wasn't ready to examine yet. The road back to Hayes Ridge stretched long and straight through the darkening land, and ahead of them, the ranch waited. Imperfect, threatened real, and behind them, a man named Harlan Caldwell was sitting somewhere, not yet knowing that his carefully constructed damage had finally been found by exactly the wrong person at exactly the right time. She straightened her back and kept her eyes on the road. There was still a great deal of work to do. They got back to Hayes Ridge after 9 o'clock. The ranch was quiet in the way working places go quiet at night. Not empty, just resting. A few lights in the bunkhouse. Pete Garland's lamp still burning in the small office off the main barn, which told her he was working on the operational report she'd asked for. She noted that and filed it as something to address in the morning. She needed Pete rested more than she needed the report one day early. Marta had left food covered on the kitchen table. Elena sat down and ate without ceremony, going through her mental list while she did. Rowan sat across from her and ate without talking, which she'd come to understand was not distance, but was how he processed. He went inward when he needed to think, and he thought before he spoke, and she found she didn't need to fill that silence anymore. She was becoming accustomed to him. That realization sat at the edge of her awareness, patient and slightly dangerous, waiting for a moment when she had time to look at it directly. This was not that moment. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "I need 2 hours with you before anything else. We have to prepare the financial summary for the new lender. Whitfield's contact will want to move fast, and we should be ready." 6:30, he said. "Good." She pushed back from the table. "The north barn roof, I told Pete I'd have a cost benefit written up for you by end of week. I want to address that before the refinancing conversation. A lender needs to see that we're managing maintenance proactively, not reactively." Rowan looked at her across the table with an expression she'd noticed increasing in frequency over the past few days, a particular quality of attention, direct and unguarded, that he didn't seem entirely aware he was directing at her. "You're already thinking about how we look to the new lender," he said. "I'm always thinking 3 steps ahead," she said. "It's a habit." "It's more than a habit," he said. She stood and took her plate to the sink. 6:30, she said again and went upstairs. She sat at the small desk in her room and wrote out the list properly, everything that needed to happen in the next 7 days, in order with the dependencies between each item noted. It was a long list. She looked at it when she was done, and felt the particular clarity that a written list provides, the way naming things takes power away from the anxiety of carrying them unnamed. Then she saw at the bottom, because she always wrote everything, even the things she wasn't sure she should put down, 3 words she hadn't planned to write. She'd written, "Don't get lost." She looked at it for a moment. Then she closed the notebook and went to bed. The financial summary took 3 hours, not 2, not because they were inefficient, because Rowan, once she started asking the right questions, turned out to have a more complete command of the ranch's finances than she'd initially credited. He'd been managing it under difficult conditions without the information he needed to manage it correctly, which is different from not understanding it. Once she laid out the structure clearly, he moved through it fast, and his answers were specific and accurate, and sometimes anticipated her follow-up question before she asked it. They built the summary together at the kitchen table with coffee going cold at their elbows and papers spread between them. And there was something in that collaborative rhythm, the way they moved through it, the way he picked up what she left, and she picked up what he left, that felt less like work and more like something she didn't have a ready name for. She named it efficiency and kept moving. By 9:30, the summary was done. It was honest, she didn't dress. The numbers didn't obscure the debt load or the deferred maintenance, but it was contextual. It showed the ranch's operational capacity, the water rights value, the realistic revenue trajectory under proper management, and the specific nature of the threats they were addressing. A good lender would read it and see a property worth protecting. A bad lender would see debt and run, which was useful information about the lender. Whitfield's contact, a woman named Patricia Hale at Sovereign Agricultural Credit in Dallas, turned out to be a good lender. When Rowan called her at 10 o'clock with Elena sitting across from him so she could hear both sides. Patricia Hale asked 3 questions, listened to the answers, and said, "Send me the summary today. If it's what you've described, I can have an initial commitment letter within 72 hours. "That fast," Rowan said. "Mr. Hayes, I've been watching First Territorial's agricultural portfolio for 2 years," she said. "Some of their notes have been managed in ways that don't serve the borrower. If yours is one of them, I'd like to move it." A pause. "Send me the summary." Rowan looked at Elena across the table. She gave him the faintest nod. "It'll be there by noon," he said. Pete's operational report landed on Elena's desk at 10:30, handwritten 12 pages, organized by system and urgency, in a way that told her Pete had been carrying this information in his head for years, and was genuinely relieved to finally put it somewhere useful. She read through it standing up, because she didn't have time to sit, and she made marks in the margin as she went. The north barn roof was correctly listed at the top of the structural concerns. Below it were 5 other items she'd either already identified or had suspected a water line running under the east pasture with a slow leak that had been worsening for months, a generator that was one hard failure away from leaving them without backup power, 2 pieces of harvesting equipment with documented mechanical issues that had been deferred, and a fencing situation on the western boundary that was, in Pete's measured words, getting worse faster than we can keep up with it. She knew this list. She'd lived a version of it her entire life. She went to find Pete. He was in the main barn, and when she walked in, he straightened slightly in the way she'd noticed he did when he was waiting to be told something was wrong. "This is good work," she said, holding up the report. He relaxed a fraction. "It's what's true," he said. "That's exactly what I needed." She moved to the first item. "The barn roof, I want to have the repair started by end of next week. Can you find a crew?" "There's a man named Roy Teschner in the county. He does structural work. I can have him here by Thursday for an assessment." "Do it. The east pasture water line, I want to know the extent of the leak before we decide how to address it. I need someone to walk the line tomorrow." "I'll do it myself," Pete said. "I know where it's going soft." "Good. The generator." "That one worries me most," Pete said. "If we lose backup power in a wet winter and the primary goes down." "Call the equipment supplier today," she said. "I want a quote on repair versus replacement on my desk tomorrow morning." Pete looked at her steadily. "You're going to do all of this at once?" "We're going to," she said. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment, with the expression she'd begun to think of as his real face, underneath the weathered practicality, a man who cared about this place very much, and had spent years watching it decline with the helplessness of someone who couldn't make anyone listen. "It's good to have someone moving the right direction," he said. It came out quietly, not performed, and she received it the same way. "Let's get to work," she said. Caldwell called that afternoon. Rowan took the call in the office with the door closed. Elena was at the kitchen table going through the refinancing documentation when she heard the door close, and something in the quality of the silence that followed told her who it was. She kept working. She listened without intending to, because the office was close enough that voices carried, and after a minute she could make out the shape of it, if not every word. Rowan's voice was even throughout, measured. Not warm, but not alarmed, the controlled surface she'd learned to read as deliberate, the voice of a man who knew what he was doing and was doing it carefully. When the call ended, Rowan came out of the office and stood in the kitchen doorway. "He wants to schedule a quarterly review," he said. "The ongoing ranch legal matters. He suggested next week." She looked up from her papers. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd check my schedule and get back to him." He paused. He seemed normal. Routine. Either he doesn't know Whitfield is moving, or he's very good at pretending. "He's been practicing the pretend for years," she said. "Don't underestimate it." He came fully into the kitchen and sat down. He looked at the papers between them, the refinancing documents, the operational summary, the growing architecture of the case they were building. He asked how things were going, Rowan said. "With the new arrangement." He didn't say her name, but she knew what he meant. "He said he'd heard from someone in Red Hollow that you'd come with me." She went still. "He asked about me," she said. "He said, and I want to be exact about this, he said, I hope the young woman is working out. These things can be complicated." Rowan's jaw was tight. "I told him things were fine." She thought about that, about Caldwell knowing she was here, about what that might mean, whether it was casual information gathering or something more pointed. "Has he ever inserted himself in your personal decisions before?" she said. "Weighed in on people around you?" Rowan thought about it. "Once," he said. "About a year after my father died. There was a hand named Garrett, good worker, been with the ranch a long time. Caldwell mentioned very casually that Garrett had been asking questions about the estate settlement, asking other hands about it. Caldwell said it might be worth considering whether Garrett was the right fit." "What happened to Garrett?" Rowan was quiet for a moment. "I let him go," he said. "I thought Caldwell was looking out for the ranch." She looked at him. "Garrett was asking the right questions," Rowan said, flatly, with the particular flatness of a man reckoning with something that can't be undone. "Caldwell cleared his own obstacle," she said. "Using you to do it." "Yes." She turned back to the refinancing documents because looking at them was easier than looking at his face right now. "We don't give him reason to do that again," she said. "We don't give him any reason to look at this ranch more carefully than he already is. Everything looks normal. Everything looks routine." She paused. "When do you need to get back to him about the meeting?" "A day or two before he'd start to think it was avoidance." "Call him Thursday," she said. "Reschedule to 3 weeks out. Give a plausible reason. The refinancing is a plausible reason without being specific about it. Banks require paperwork. It's a busy time. He'll understand that." "And 3 weeks out." "In 3 weeks," she said, "we'll either be ready to move or we'll know we need to adjust the plan." She looked up. "Whitfield moves fast if he has what he needs. We make sure he has what he needs." Rowan nodded. Then, "Elena, he mentioned you by name." She held his gaze. "He knows you're here," Rowan said. "I don't know how he knows what he knows, but I want you to be aware." Something moved through her. Not fear, not exactly. Something colder and more alert. "I appreciate that," she said. "I mean it as a practical concern," he said. "Not to worry you." "I know," she said. "I'm not worried. I'm paying attention." He looked at her steadily. "There's a difference. A large one," she said. The Alderton family contacted Whitfield on Wednesday. Whitfield called with the news late afternoon, and his voice had the particular quality of controlled satisfaction that she'd come to recognize in him. The tone of a man whose theory had been confirmed by evidence, which was the only kind of satisfaction a good lawyer permitted himself. The Aldertons had not sold willingly. They'd been pressured through a combination of a called note at First Territorial Bank. Harold Fitch again, and a legal maneuver by Caldwell that had characterized their father's estate as carrying unresolved debt, creating the appearance of distress that triggered the Meridian Group's purchase right on their northern range. Identical mechanism. Different family. 3 years earlier. They have records, Whitfield said. Their own bookkeeper kept copies. And their current attorney, a man I know and trust, has been trying to build this case for 2 years without enough evidence. He paused. We now have enough evidence. The Aldertons and Hayes Ridge together, Elena said. She was standing in the office with Rowan beside her. 2 documented instances of the same scheme. With the same principles, Whitfield said. Caldwell, the Meridian Group Fitch at First Territorial. It's a conspiracy to defraud under territorial law, and with 2 victims and documented coordination between the parties, the Territorial Attorney General's office will have to take it seriously. You're taking it to the Attorney General, Rowan said. I'm filing a complaint tomorrow. Whitfield said, I want to move before Caldwell has any opportunity to act. Once the AG's office opens an investigation, Caldwell is constrained. Anything he does to the Hayes Ridge note or the Alderton situation at that point becomes obstruction. Another pause. I'd like both of you in Austin Friday morning. Can you make that work? We'll be there, Elena said. She ended the call and turned to find Rowan looking at her with that unguarded expression again, the one she was running out of ways to deflect. Friday, he said. Friday, she confirmed. It's moving, he said. Yes. He leaned against the desk and crossed his arms and looked at the middle distance, processing the way he did. She waited because she'd learned that his thinking was worth waiting for. When my father was dying, he said slowly. He told me one thing that I've thought about almost every day since. He said, the ranch isn't land and cattle, Rowan. It's what we owe the people who come after. He stopped. I thought he meant our family. Legacy, that kind of thing. Another pause. I think now he might have meant it more practically. That this place, the water rights, the northern range, all of it matters to more than just us. The people who work here. The families downstream who use the water. She looked at him. If the Meridian Group had gotten the water rights, she said, they'd have monetized them. Charged what the market would bear, he said, which in a dry year is everything a ranching family has. He looked at her. Caldwell knew that. He knew what they'd do with it. She thought about Pete Garland and his 8 months of trying to get someone to look at the barn roof. She thought about June Paris keeping a box of records for 4 years because she knew something was wrong and didn't know who to tell. She thought about William Hayes writing letters to a friend in Fort Worth, feeling something was off, not quite seeing the whole shape of it. Your father built something that mattered, she said. That's worth protecting. He looked at her steadily. We're protecting it, he said. The we again. Simple, immediate, not a performance. She looked away first. Thursday brought 2 things she hadn't anticipated. The first was a letter from Red Hollow. It arrived in the Morning Post, her name in handwriting she recognized immediately, Savannah's. She stood in the kitchen and opened it and read it, aware of Marta nearby trying to be tactful about her curiosity. The letter was not long. It was not emotional, which was Savannah's way. She'd been raised in the same household as Elena and had the same instinct toward practicality in written communication, which was the only way in which they were genuinely alike. Savannah wrote, Father has stopped drinking. I don't know how long it will hold. He says it's because you left and he had to decide who he was without you fixing everything. I thought you should know. Also, the pump is holding fine. Your instructions were clear. Elena read it twice. She folded it and put it in her pocket. She sat with it all morning. The complicated weight of a letter like that. The particular sensation of receiving news that is good and painful at the same time. Her father had stopped drinking. She didn't know what to do with that, except hold it carefully and not draw conclusions yet. She'd learned not to draw conclusions about Gerald Brooks until they had the weight of time behind them. But Savannah had written. That was real. That was new. She told Rowan about it that evening, not because she'd planned to, but because they were sitting on the porch after dinner, a habit that had developed over the past week, 20 minutes at the end of the day, where neither of them worked, which was Rowan's idea, and which she'd accepted because it was harder to argue against rest than to simply agree to it. She told him about the letter in the same flat, careful way she reported other facts. She watched him listen. "Do you want to go back?" he said when she finished. "No," she said immediately, then more slowly. "It's complicated. What I feel about it is complicated, but no." "Why no?" he said, not challenging, genuinely asking the way he asked everything. She thought about it honestly. "Because what I'm doing here is real," she said. "Because I chose it. Because going back would be—" She stopped. "I don't go backward," she said. "I never have." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you go toward?" he said. She looked at him. The evening light was doing something to his face that made the question feel more direct than it probably was. "Things that need doing," she said. "Is that all?" he said. She looked at the darkening yard rather than at him. "Not anymore," she said. She said it quietly enough that she could have meant anything, and that was intentional, and she knew. He knew it was intentional, and she knew he was going to let her have that ambiguity, because that was the kind of man he was. They sat in silence for another few minutes. Then she said, "You should know that I wrote back to Savannah." "What did you say?" "That I'm glad." "About father." "That I'll write again when things are less active." A pause. "That she can call on me if she needs to, that the offer stands." He looked at her. "You're still taking care of her." "No," she said, and she meant it firmly. "I'm making myself available. That's different. She has to decide what to do with it." He nodded slowly. "The distinction matters to you." "The distinction is everything," she said. The second thing Thursday brought was worse than unexpected. At 4 in the afternoon, Cal Briggs came to find her in the east pasture, where she was walking the water line with Pete. Cal had the expression of a man delivering news he didn't want to deliver, which on his characteristically neutral face was noticeable enough that she stopped walking before he spoke. "Ryder came from town," Cal said. "Message for Mr. Hayes. I thought you should know before he sees it." She looked at him steadily. "Tell me." "Harlan Caldwell is in Red Hollow," Cal said. "He was seen this morning at the Brooks property." The cold alert thing from earlier in the week returned sharper now. "You're sure?" she said. "Man who brought the message saw him himself. Said Caldwell spent about an hour at the house, spoke to Gerald Brooks." Pete Garland beside her had gone very still. Elena looked at the ground for a moment. She thought about what Caldwell would want from Gerald Brooks. She thought about what Gerald Brooks, who resented her, who felt publicly humiliated by Rowan Hayes' choice, who had spent weeks now sitting with that humiliation, might be willing to say to a sympathetic stranger with questions. She thought about what Caldwell might already know, about the letter to Whitfield, about the financial summary sent to Patricia Hale, about the 72 hours they were now inside on the commitment letter. "How long ago did the writer leave Red Hollow?" she said. 6 hours, Cal said. "Which means Caldwell has been out of Red Hollow for at least 5 hours, she said. "He could be anywhere." She looked at Cal directly. "Did the message say whether he was traveling toward Austin?" "Ryder didn't know," Cal said. "Just that he was at the Brooks house, and then he left." She moved fast. Rowan was in the office when she came in without knocking. She told him in 40 seconds. She watched his face go through the calculation the same way she'd gone through it in the field, fast controlled, arriving at the same place she had. "He went to your father," Rowan said. "He went to the most likely source of information about me," she said. "About us, about what we're doing. What would your father tell him?" She thought about Gerald Brooks, the resentment, the humiliation, the whiskey, the performance of dignity over ruin. She thought about whether he'd have the presence of mind to be guarded with a smooth, pleasant stranger who came with sympathy and questions. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know what he knows or what he'd say." "But if he talked, Caldwell knows we're active," she said. "He knows we've been making trips to Austin. He might know about Whitfield if the wrong person saw us." She paused. "We have to assume he knows, and we have to call Whitfield right now." Rowan was already reaching for the telephone. Whitfield picked up on the second ring. Elena stood beside Rowan and talked while Rowan listened, and she laid it out clean and fast, Caldwell in Red Hollow. The visit to Gerald Brooks, the timeline, the implication. Whitfield was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. "How close are we to the bank commitment letter?" Patricia Hale said 72 hours from yesterday morning, Elena said. "That's roughly 36 hours from now," Whitfield said. "If Caldwell knows something is moving, he'll try to go to Fitch before that commitment letter arrives. A called note creates distress before we can refinance." "Can Fitch call the note without warning?" Rowan said. "On some legal grounds, yes," Whitfield said. "With 30 days' notice, he has broader grounds. But if he claims a technical default—" He stopped. "Mr. Hayes, are all your payments current?" "Completely," Elena said before Rowan could answer, because she'd confirmed this herself when she built the financial summary. "Every payment, every covenant, nothing outstanding." "Good," Whitfield said. "A called note without grounds is challengeable, and Fitch knows it. He'll move carefully." A pause. "But carefully doesn't mean slowly. I'm filing with the Attorney General's office first thing tomorrow morning. I was going to wait for Friday's meeting to walk you through it, but we don't have that time." "File tomorrow," Elena said. "We'll be in Austin at 7. She ended the call. The office was quiet. Rowan looked at her. "What's your read?" he said. "On Caldwell. What does he do next?" She thought about it. She thought about what she knew of him, not the man whom she'd never met, but the pattern of him. The patience, the long, careful architecture, the way he worked through other people's trust, rather than doing anything himself. "He doesn't panic," she said. "He's too practiced for that. He'll assess what he knows, decide what's actionable, and move through the right channel." She paused. "Which is Fitch. The note is the only lever he has that moves fast enough to matter." "And the Attorney General filing tomorrow constrains Fitch," she said. "Once there's an active investigation, anything Fitch does that looks like coordinated action becomes part of the case against them. Caldwell knows that. If he's going to move through Fitch, he moves before the filing." "Which means tonight or early tomorrow?" "Yes." The silence between them was taut and specific, not the comfortable working silence she'd grown used to. This was the silence of a decision hanging. "Call Patricia Hale," she said. "Tell her we need the commitment letter tonight if possible. Explain that there's a time-sensitive situation. Tell her—" She stopped. "Tell her the truth. Tell her why we moved the note." Rowan looked at her. "All of it." "Enough," she said. "She'll understand. She said herself she's been watching First Territorial's agricultural portfolio for 2 years. She already suspects something is wrong there. Tell her what we're dealing with." He picked up the telephone. "Say." Patricia Hale called back 40 minutes later. She had a voice that hadn't changed in pitch or warmth between the first conversation and this one, which told Elena she was either unflappable by nature or had made a decision and was standing behind it. "I've reviewed the summary your Ms. Brooks sent me," she said. "I have a few clarifying questions." She asked them. Elena answered them because Rowan handed her the telephone when it became clear that Patricia Hale's questions were operational and financial rather than relational, and Elena had built the summary and knew every number in it. 15 minutes of specific, rapid back and forth. Then Patricia Hale said, "I'm going to issue the commitment letter tonight, conditional on standard due diligence, which will begin tomorrow. But the commitment is real, and it's tonight. And if First Territorial tries to call that note before our due diligence closes, you show them this letter and you call me directly." "Thank you," Elena said. "Ms. Brooks," Patricia Hale said. "That summary was one of the clearest financial documents I've received from a ranch operation in 15 years. I don't say that lightly. Elena looked at Rowan across the desk. I had good material to work with, she said. She handed the telephone back to Rowan. He said a few closing words to Patricia Hale and ended the call and set the receiver down, and was quiet for a moment. Tonight, he said. Tonight, she confirmed. He let out a slow breath. Not relief they weren't there yet. More the breath of a man who's been running and has found not the end of the run, but solid ground under his feet. Elena. He said her name the way he'd started saying it over the past few days, not as a conversation opener or a practical signal, but as a thing in itself. Her name stated as if the fact of her were the point. She looked at him. I need you to know something, he said. He said it carefully, the way he said things he'd thought about before saying. When I rode into Red Hollow, I had a list of what I was looking for. I was very certain I knew what I needed. He paused. I knew nothing. She didn't look away. I know what I was looking for had nothing to do with you, she said. I know you didn't come there for me specifically. No, he said. But I found you specifically, and everything that has happened since. He stopped, started again. I have not been this certain about a person in my life. I want you to know that, regardless of what you do with it. The words landed the way solid things land, with weight, with reality, without the hollow sound of something performative. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm not easy, she said finally. I'm not what Savannah was being prepared to be. I don't know how to be the kind of woman who makes things comfortable. I don't want comfortable, he said. I had comfortable. Comfortable is why it took 4 years to find the damage in this ranch. She almost smiled at that. She felt it at the corner of her mouth and didn't suppress it. What do you want? She said. I think I've been pretty clear about that, he said. She looked at him steadily. She thought about "Don't get lost" written in her own handwriting at the bottom of a list. She thought about what she'd said on the porch last night, not anymore, and the deliberate ambiguity of it, and how she'd been hiding behind the ambiguity, because she was a woman who'd been invisible for so long that being seen still felt like something that might be taken back. I'm not going anywhere, she said. It was not the same thing as everything he'd said, but it was real, and it was true, and it was what she had right now, and he understood that. Good, he said, simply, the way he said things that had never actually been in question. The commitment letter from Patricia Hale arrived by courier at 10:45 that night. Elena read every word of it at the kitchen table. It was clean, solid, specific, the kind of document built to stand scrutiny. She made 2 notes in the margin questions for Whitfield in the morning, and then she set it on the desk in the office under the paperweight. Her grandfather's name was engraved on. She'd brought it from Red Hollow, without fully knowing why, and she knew now it was because some part of her had understood she'd need to anchor something important here. She went to bed at midnight. She lay in the dark and thought about Caldwell somewhere in the distance, calculating, moving carefully through his next steps. She thought about Harold Fitch at First Territorial, who had cried at William Hayes's funeral and then spent 4 years working against the man's son. She thought about William Hayes's journals and the weight of a man who'd felt something was wrong and couldn't find the whole shape of it. She thought about Pete Garland's relief when she'd finally asked for the operational report. About Marta's carefully kept household accounts. About June Paris carrying a box of records for 4 years out of nothing more than the instinct that the truth deserved to be kept safe somewhere. All these people holding pieces. All these people waiting for someone to come who would take the pieces seriously. She turned on her side. She thought this is what it feels like to be in the right place. Not comfortable, not settled, not finished. But right, the specific rightness of being exactly where your capabilities are needed, exactly where the work matches what you actually are. She'd spent 24 years being invisible in a place that didn't deserve her. She was not invisible here. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she slept without the low-level vigilance that had been her companion since childhood, that constant partial alertness of a person who can't fully rest because something will break and no one else will fix it. Here other people were also watching. Other people were also capable. Other people were also fighting for the same thing. She was not alone in it. She slept. She was up before 5. Not because she'd slept badly, she hadn't for the first time in longer than she could remember, but because the day ahead had a shape to it that required early preparation, and preparation was how she made peace with uncertainty. She dressed in the dark, went downstairs, and made coffee before Marta appeared, which was itself unusual enough that Marta raised an eyebrow when she came into the kitchen and found Elena already at the table with a full cup and 3 pages of notes. "Austin today," Marta said. 7 o'clock, Elena said. Marta looked at the notes without reading them. She'd developed a particular form of respectful curiosity over the past weeks, always present, never intrusive. The manner of a woman who understood that the activity in this house had become important, and that her role in it was to keep the foundation steady, while everything else moved. "I'll have breakfast ready by 6:15, Marta said. "Thank you," Elena said. And meant it. She went back to her notes. What she was preparing for was not a single meeting. It was a sequence: Whitfield's filing with the Attorney General's office at 9, followed immediately by a formal meeting with Whitfield and the Alderton family's attorney, a man named Samuel Cross, who Whitfield had described as meticulous and prepared and utterly unimpressed by Harlan Caldwell's reputation. Then in the afternoon, a meeting that Whitfield had arranged and not fully explained over the telephone except to say, "You'll want to be there, both of you, and bring everything." She didn't like unexplained meetings. She'd said so to Whitfield. He'd said, "I know, come anyway." She was turning that over when Rowan appeared in the kitchen doorway at 5:40, already dressed with the particular look of a man who had also not wasted time sleeping past necessity. He looked at her notes. "How long have you been up?" "Long enough," she said. "Sit down, there's coffee." He sat. He poured. He looked at her across the table in the early morning quiet that had become over the past weeks one of the most natural things in her life. This specific silence, this specific person, this specific quality of beginning a day together. "Whitfield's afternoon meeting," he said. "You're worried about it." "I don't like information I don't have," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you trust Whitfield." She considered this. "I trust his judgment on legal matters," she said. "The unexplained meeting is a legal matter, so I'll trust it." "That's very disciplined of you," he said, and there was the quiet warmth in it that she'd stopped trying to deflect 2 weeks ago. She almost smiled. "Stop?" she said. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" She gave him a look that said he knew perfectly well what thing. He picked up his coffee cup to hide the fact that he was in fact doing the thing. She gathered her notes. 6:15 Marta's making breakfast. We leave at 7. Don't be late. "I've never been late," he said. "No," she said. "You haven't." She paused at the doorway. "That's something I appreciate about you." She went upstairs before he could respond because she'd learned that the moments that mattered most between them required an exit, or they'd sit in them too long and she'd say something she wasn't ready to say yet. Almost ready. Not yet. The drive to Austin was focused and quick. Cal Briggs drove without being asked to hurry, but he'd understood for weeks now that time was a resource being carefully managed, and his pace reflected that understanding. Elena went through the documents one final time. The comprehensive package Whitfield had assembled was formidable: the Meridian Group agreement, the settlement discrepancies, June Paris's records, the William Hayes correspondence with Thomas Reeve Caldwell's dual principal status, the Alderton parallel case, Patricia Hale's commitment letter. Separately, the operational summary and the ranch's current financial position, which demonstrated clearly that Hayes Ridge was a viable functioning operation being targeted, rather than a failing property being legitimately acquired. She turned the last page and set it down. "Ready," Rowan said. "Been ready," she said. He looked at her with something she'd stopped trying to name, that specific thing his face did when he looked at her, which was somewhere between admiration and certainty, and something quieter and more permanent than both. "Yes," he said. "You have." "What?" The Attorney General's office occupied the kind of institutional building that was designed to convey permanence, and Whitfield navigated it with the ease of a man who'd been there many times and knew which hallways to avoid. He met them in the lobby at 8:40, with Samuel Cross beside him, a tall, thin man in his 50s, with the watchful patience of a chess player and the handshake of someone who'd spent a career meaning exactly what he said. "Mr. Hayes," Cross said. "Miss Brooks." He looked at Elena directly. "Mr. Whitfield tells me you found the Meridian Agreement in 2 hours." "2 hours, yes," she said. "Caldwell had 4 years," Cross said. Not with anger, with the flat precision of a man building a record. "That's in the filing." The filing happened at 9 o'clock and took 12 minutes in the office of a Deputy Attorney General named Vera Hutchins, who was 40 years old and had the compact efficiency of someone who processed significant information daily and had long since stopped being surprised by human capacity for organized greed. She reviewed the submission package with Whitfield, while Elena, Rowan, and Cross sat along the wall. Hutchins read without speaking for 19 minutes. Then she looked up and said, "The Alderton parallel is the key, Mr. Whitfield. You understand that?" "I do," Whitfield said. "One case is a bad lawyer. 2 cases with the same principles and the same mechanism is a conspiracy." She looked at the package. "You have documentation of coordination between Caldwell and Fitch. The Meridian Group correspondence referencing Fitch as a cooperative regional contact," Whitfield said. "And the Alderton's note was called by Fitch within 3 weeks of Caldwell's estate administration, concluding same timeline as the Hayes situation." Hutchins nodded once. "I'm opening an investigation today. Harlan Caldwell, Harold Fitch, and the Meridian Group principals will receive notification this afternoon that they are subjects of an Attorney General inquiry." She looked at Rowan. "Mr. Hayes, you understand that this doesn't immediately resolve your property situation." "I understand," Rowan said. "The Meridian Group agreement your father signed is a valid contract. Challenging its enforceability requires either demonstrating fraud in its execution or demonstrating that the settlement conditions used to trigger it were themselves fraudulently constructed." She paused. "Mr. Whitfield believes he can do both. I believe he has the evidence to attempt it. Whether the court agrees is a different question." "What's the timeline?" Elena said. Hutchins looked at her. "For the investigation, 30 days to preliminary findings. For the legal challenge to the estate settlement that depends on the court's calendar, 6 to 10 weeks minimum before a hearing." 6 to 10 weeks. Elena filed that and its implications immediately. 6 to 10 weeks during which the ranch had to remain financially stable and operationally sound, and legally protected from any acceleration Caldwell might attempt. "The AG investigation constrains Caldwell's ability to act," she said. "Significantly," Hutchins said. "Any action he takes against Hayes Ridge during an active investigation of his conduct will be scrutinized as potential obstruction. His attorneys will advise him strongly to be quiet and patient." A pause. "He's not going to stop wanting the land, but he's going to have to wait. And while he waits," Cross said, "we build the case." The morning meeting ended at 11. Whitfield took them to a quiet room off the main corridor and closed the door. He looked at them both with the expression of a man about to explain the afternoon. "The meeting at 2 o'clock, Elena said. "Tell me now." "There's a woman named Margaret Alderton," Whitfield said. "She's the eldest daughter of the family who lost the Northern Range to the Meridian Group 3 years ago. She contacted Cross 2 years ago when she first suspected fraud. She's spent those 2 years trying to find someone who would listen." He paused. "She'd like to meet you, Elena." Elena looked at him. "Me specifically. Cross told her what you found, how you found it, what you've been doing these past weeks." Whitfield said it plainly. "She's 61 years old. She ran her family's ranch for 20 years while her father was ill, and her brothers weren't interested. She lost the land because no one listened to her when she said something was wrong." He met her eyes. "She asked to meet the woman who found what she couldn't." The room was very quiet. Rowan didn't say anything. He was watching her with the understanding of someone who knew exactly what this meant and was giving her the space to receive it at her own pace. "Yes," Elena said. "Of course." Margaret Alderton was exactly what Whitfield's description had built her to be, and also entirely different from what Elena had imagined, which was always the case with real people. She was compact and direct, and she moved with the permanent efficiency of a woman who'd worked physical land her entire life. Her hands looked like Elena's hands. She sat across the table in Whitfield's conference room and looked at Elena with dark, level eyes that had assessed difficult situations long enough to do it without drama. They looked at each other for a moment. "You found the Meridian Agreement in 2 hours," Margaret said. "Yes," Elena said. "I had the original paperwork from my father's estate," Margaret said. "I went through it 4 times. I missed it." She said it without self-pity as a fact. Caldwell was very good at burying it. "He buried it in a dense section of technical conveyancing language," Elena said. "And he filed it out of sequence, which means you'd have to be reading out of order to encounter it where it was placed. If you were reading logically, you'd go right past it," Margaret said. "Yes." A silence. "How did you find it?" Margaret said. "I don't read in order," Elena said. "I read by looking for what's wrong with the shape of something. When something is hidden, the hiding changes the shape." She paused. The document sequence was too clean everywhere else. One area was inconsistent. I went there first. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "I wish I'd found you 3 years ago," she said. "I wasn't in a position to be found 3 years ago," Elena said. Margaret glanced at Rowan briefly with the specific look of a woman who understood context without being told it. Then she looked back at Elena. "Will you testify?" she said. "If this goes to court, about what you found, how you found it, the chain of evidence." "Yes," Elena said, without hesitation. "They'll try to discredit you," Margaret said. "Caldwell's attorneys. They'll say you're a ranch hand with no formal credentials. They'll question your ability to assess financial documents." "They're welcome to," Elena said. "The documents speak for themselves. I'll speak to how I found them and what they show. Anyone who understands basic arithmetic can verify my work." Margaret looked at her steadily. Then something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but opened slightly the way a person's face opens when they've been braced for a long time and have finally found solid ground. "Cross told me you drew a salary settlement in your contract," Margaret said. "That you negotiated your own terms before you agreed to come here." "I did," Elena said. "Good," Margaret said. Simply with the weight of a woman who'd spent decades being the one who didn't negotiate, who accepted what was offered, because she'd been raised to believe that was how things worked. "Good for you." Rowan beside Elena was very still. She could feel the quality of his attention, without looking at him, the way he was absorbing this conversation, what it was costing Margaret Alderton to sit here, what it meant that she was here at all. Cross leaned forward. "Margaret, if the court challenge to the Hayes estate settlement succeeds, there's a secondary argument that the Meridian Group's acquisition of the Alderton land should also be reviewed, given the identical mechanism and the same parties. It's not certain, but it's possible." Margaret Alderton sat with that. "Possible," she said carefully. "The water rights you lost," Cross said. "The Northern Range. If the conspiracy is established as a pattern Caldwell-Fitch, the Meridian Group acting in concert against multiple families, then the acquisitions made through that conspiracy can be challenged." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Elena watched her face and saw something moving through it that was too large and too private to name years of fighting and being ignored, the weight of land that had been her family's for 3 generations, the specific grief of losing something, not to bad luck, but to deliberate malice. "I'd stopped believing that was possible," Margaret said quietly. "It became possible 2 weeks ago," Whitfield said, "when Elena found the Meridian Agreement in that filing cabinet." Margaret looked at Elena. Elena looked back. 2 women who had fixed things alone in the dark for years while people around them looked the other way. 2 women who had carried the work without carrying the title. Two women who knew what it was to be the one who stayed when everyone else found a reason to leave. "Thank you," Margaret said. She said it to Elena directly without ceremony, the way practical people say true things. "We're not finished yet," Elena said. "No," Margaret said. "But we're further than we've ever been." They left Austin at 4:30. The drive back was different from every other drive they'd made. Not quieter, it had the quality of a different kind of fullness, the way a room feels after something significant has happened in it, and the air hasn't settled yet. Rowan sat beside her and looked out the window, and after about 20 minutes he said, "Margaret Alderton was right about the testimony." "I know," Elena said. "They'll come at you hard. I know that too. Are you ready for it?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. "I've been underestimated my entire life," she said. "I've learned to use it." They'll walk into that courtroom expecting a ranch hand who got lucky. They'll find someone who knows every number in every document and can explain exactly why each one matters. She paused. "Underestimating me is their problem, not mine." Rowan turned from the window and looked at her with full attention. "When did you figure that out?" he said, "that it was their problem?" She considered it. "Somewhere between the pump housing and the fence line," she said. "The morning you arrived." He held her gaze. "I walked around the front of that house," he said, "and I'd already decided." "You'd decided in 10 minutes," she said. 5, he said. "I saw you restring the fence before I came to the pump. I watched you for a few minutes before I came around." He said it simply without apology. "I knew." She looked at him. "You should have led with that," she said. "You would have run," he said. She thought about it. "Probably," she admitted. He almost smiled. She felt it more than she saw it. "I needed you to stay," he said. "So I took my time." She shook her head slowly. "That is remarkably calculated for a man who claims to value directness." "I value directness," he said. "I also value you. Sometimes you have to choose which one serves the moment." She looked at him steadily. The thing that had been accumulating between them for weeks, the careful not naming of it, the deliberate ambiguity she'd maintained, because she was still learning to trust that being seen didn't mean being trapped, was at its absolute limit. "Rowan," she said. "Yes," he said, not as a response. As an answer to something she hadn't said yet. She almost laughed. "You don't know what I was going to say." "I do," he said. "And the answer is yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then, "You are very sure of yourself." "I'm sure of you," he said. "Which is different." She turned back to the road ahead. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was aware of exactly how close they were sitting, and the quality of the silence that had settled, which was not ambiguous at all anymore, and they both knew it. "When this is finished," she said, "when Whitfield has what he needs, and the court has heard the case, and Margaret Alderton has whatever she's owed when it's done." "Yes," he said again. "I'm still going to be difficult," she said. "I'm still going to be the person who fixes things before asking for help. I'm still going to know what I want and say so." "Elena," he said with patient, absolute certainty, "those are not problems. Those are why I rode to Red Hollow." She absorbed that. She let herself receive it the way she'd been learning to receive things, not deflecting, not minimizing, not looking for the catch, just taking it as what it was. A true thing said plainly by a person who meant it. "All right," she said quietly. "All right," he agreed. The 6 weeks that followed were the most demanding of her life and also the most fully lived. She testified before the territorial court on a Tuesday morning in November, with James Whitfield at the table beside her, and Rowan Hayes 3 rows back in the gallery, and she answered every question the opposing counsel put to her with the same quality she brought to every problem. Clear, specific, rooted in evidence, immune to the particular condescension of a man who'd expected her to falter. She didn't falter. The documents said what she'd said they said. The numbers did what she'd said they did. The chain of evidence she'd constructed over those weeks at the Hayes Ridge office desk held under examination because it was true, And truth has a structural integrity that skilled cross-examination cannot undermine, only probe. When Caldwell's attorney said with a voice designed to carry skepticism, "Miss Brooks, you have no formal legal or financial training. Is that correct?" She looked at him and said, "That's correct. I have practical experience managing ranch finances under difficult conditions and the mathematical and logical capacity to read what documents actually say rather than what someone arranged them to appear to say. The court has the documents. I'd invite anyone here to verify my arithmetic." No one found an error. Harlan Caldwell sat at the opposing table throughout and looked at her with the careful blankness of a man who'd spent years being underestimated himself, and had just understood that he'd made the most consequential miscalculation of his career. He'd gone to Red Hollow to find a weakness. He'd found Gerald Brooks, and a whiskey glass, and a man who resented his daughter's departure. What he hadn't found, what he couldn't have known to look for, was that Gerald Brooks didn't actually know what Elena had discovered. Elena had told her father nothing. Because she'd learned over a lifetime of watching Gerald Brooks that information given to him traveled. Caldwell had come away from Red Hollow with nothing useful. He'd spent the 6 weeks since then very quiet and very careful, exactly as Hutchins had predicted, while Whitfield built the wall around him, brick by brick. The court took 11 days to deliberate. Whitfield called on a Wednesday. Elena was in the east pasture when her name was called across the yard. Pete Garland's voice, urgent enough to carry. She walked fast toward the main house. She could see Rowan on the porch with the telephone receiver, and his posture told her before she heard his voice that it was over. She walked up the porch steps. He held the receiver out to her. She took it. Whitfield. "The estate settlement has been set aside," Whitfield said. "Fraud in the administration. The court found that Caldwell's dual role as estate administrator and Meridian Group principal constituted a fundamental conflict of interest that invalidated his administration of the Hayes estate. The Meridian Group's land claim, the 4,300 acres, and the water rights is void." She closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 second of something enormous and simple moving through her. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Something quieter and more solid. The specific sensation of a thing that was true becoming official. Of the world finally catching up to what the documents had always said. She opened her eyes. "The criminal referral," she said. "The AG's office is proceeding," Whitfield said. "Caldwell Fitch and 2 of the Meridian Group principals. The Alderton case is part of it. Cross and I believe there may be at least 2 more families we haven't identified yet. The investigation is expanding." "Margaret Alderton," she said. "Cross is filing a challenge to the Alderton acquisition today," Whitfield said. "On the basis of the established conspiracy. It's not guaranteed, but given what the court found today, I'd say the Alderton land has a real chance of coming home." She stood on the porch and looked out at the yard at Pete Garland, watching from the barn doorway at Cal Briggs, who'd appeared from somewhere and was standing with his hat in his hands at Marta, visible through the kitchen window, hands still watching. All these people who'd held the pieces. "Thank you, James," she said. She meant it with everything she had. "Don't thank me," Whitfield said. "You found it. All I did was build around what you gave me." She handed the receiver back to Rowan. He set it down. He looked at her. Pete Garland called from the barn, "Well." Rowan looked at Elena. She looked back at him. "Tell him," she said. Rowan turned toward the yard and raised his voice for the first time she'd ever heard him raise it, not in anger, not in urgency, but in something that was plain and full and real. "The land stays," he said. "All of it. It's ours." The sound that went through the yard was not loud. It was the sound of people who'd been waiting a long time exhaling at the same moment. Pete Garland put his hat back on his head and turned back into the barn, and she knew from the set of his shoulders that he was doing it to have a private moment. Cal Briggs looked at the sky. Marta disappeared from the kitchen window. Elena stood on the porch and felt the November air on her face and didn't try to do anything with what she was feeling. She just let it be there. All of it, the relief, the satisfaction of a thing finished correctly, the weight of the weeks it had taken. The faces of Margaret Alderton and June Paris, and the ghost of William Hayes, writing letters to a friend in Fort Worth, trying to see the whole shape of something that had finally been seen. Rowan was beside her. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She was aware of him the way she was aware of solid ground, not by looking at it, just by standing on it. "I thought I chose you for my ranch," he said. She recognized it as the thing he'd been building toward for weeks. The thing she'd felt coming, and hadn't rushed, and hadn't deflected. She waited. "I didn't," he said. "I needed you for myself. I just didn't know how to say it until now." She turned and looked at him. He was looking at her, the way he'd looked at her on the very first day, direct, serious, entirely certain. The man who'd crouched next to a pump housing and asked what was wrong with it. The man who'd written down her terms in his own handwriting and handed her the pen to add more. The man who'd sat across from her, night after night while she built the case that saved his father's land, and never once asked her to be anything other than exactly what she was. "You were always enough," he said quietly. "From the first 5 minutes. I need you to know that." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the girl who'd repaired fences before sunrise and carried broken equipment across fields no one else touched. She thought about 24 years of being the wrong daughter, too practical, too plain, too real, too much, and never enough simultaneously. She thought about the screen door swinging shut behind her, the last morning in Red Hollow, and the road east, and the specific quality of open air. She thought about what it felt like to be chosen, not because she was beautiful, not because she was convenient, not because she was available, but because she was real, and capable, and true, and someone had finally had the eyes to see it. "I know," she said. She stepped toward him. He didn't move. He waited the way he always waited, patient and absolutely certain, and she came to him by her own choice on her own feet, the way she did everything. And when she put her hand against his chest and felt his hand cover hers, she understood that this was what it felt like to arrive somewhere you'd been moving toward without knowing it. Not rescued, not claimed. Chosen. By someone worth choosing back. Mud. December brought the first real cold to Hayes Ridge, and with it the repair crew for the north barn roof, 3 pieces of rebuilt equipment arriving from the supplier, and the news that the east pasture water line had been fully relined and was holding pressure for the first time in 4 years. The operational report Pete Garland had written in 2 days became the foundation of a full maintenance plan that Elena worked through systematically, item by item, checking things off, with the same methodical attention she'd brought to everything since she arrived. The ranch moved differently now, not just in the practical things, but in a quality harder to name. The way people showed up to the work. The way problems got reported instead of quietly buried. The way Pete Garland walked through the yard with the straightened posture of a man whose judgment was finally being used. June Paris came to Hayes Ridge for dinner one Saturday in early December. She sat at the long kitchen table with Marta and Cal Briggs and Pete and Rowan and Elena, and she told stories about William Hayes that made Rowan laugh for the first time Elena had seen him truly laugh, open, surprised, real. June looked at Elena across the table at one point, with quiet satisfaction, the expression of someone who'd kept a box of records for 4 years, on faith that someday they'd matter, and had been proven right. A letter came from Red Hollow in the second week of December. This one was from her father. Gerald Brooks wrote in the careful, slightly stiff penmanship of a man who was not accustomed to letters and was doing the thing anyway. He wrote that he'd heard through the town that the situation at Hayes Ridge had been resolved favorably. He wrote that he was glad. He wrote, and this was the line she read 3 times, that he hadn't understood while she was with them what he had. That he understood it now. He did not ask her to come back. He did not try to reclaim anything. He said only that he hoped she was well, and that if she was ever in Red Hollow, he'd like to see her. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she wrote back. Short, honest, the way she wrote everything. She said she was well. She said she was glad he'd heard. She said she'd visit when she could, and she meant it. She sealed it and set it by the door for the morning post, and went back to the kitchen where Rowan was reading at the table, and she sat down across from him, and he looked up at her with the expression she'd stopped trying to classify and started simply receiving, and said, "All right." "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Your father?" "Yes," she said again. "It's going to take time, but yes." He nodded and looked back at his reading, and she picked up her own papers, and they sat together in the evening quiet of a house that was finally genuinely healing its systems, repaired its people, steady its land, protected its long-buried truth, finally brought into the air where it belonged. Margaret Alderton's challenge to the Meridian Group acquisition moved through the courts through the winter slowly and then with increasing momentum as the conspiracy case built. Caldwell surrendered his law license in January. Harold Fitch resigned from First Territorial Bank in February, under pressure from the bank's board, which had received the Attorney General's preliminary findings and had no appetite for what was coming. The Meridian Group's principals began negotiating separately with the AG's office, which Whitfield said was the surest possible sign that the case was strong. In March, on a morning when the light had started to change the way it does, when a long winter is finally deciding to move, Elena stood at the east fence line of Hayes Ridge and looked out across the northern range, 4,300 acres of good Texas land with water underneath it that belonged to no one but the man who'd built the family that had always been meant to hold it, and she felt something settle in her that had been unsettled for as long as she could remember. Not peace exactly. She wasn't built for pure peace. She was built for work, for problems, for the specific aliveness of things that needed doing. But underneath the work, underneath the movement, there was a new foundation. Solid. Earned. Rowan came up behind her and stood beside her at the fence, close enough that their arms touched, and they looked out at the land together in the morning light. "Pete wants to start the North Range rotation in 2 weeks, she said. "Tell him yes," Rowan said. "I already told him yes," she said. "I know," he said. "I like that you told him yes." She looked at him sideways. "You like that I make decisions without consulting you." "I like that you trust your judgment," he said. "And I like that you're right most of the time." "Most of the time," she repeated. "The generator," he said. "I still think repair was the right call. The generator needed replacement and you know it," she said. "It's holding now, but we'll be back to the same conversation in 18 months. He considered this. "Probably," he admitted. "Definitely," she said. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she let him, which was still something she'd had to learn to do, not because it was unwelcome, but because the simple act of being held by someone who'd chosen her deliberately and without condition was something she'd had no practice with, and was still learning to receive without bracing. She was learning. She leaned into it slightly. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just stood beside her at the fence he'd found her working the day they met on land that was no longer threatened in a life she had built by her own hands and her own choices. The woman who had been invisible in Red Hollow was not invisible here. She had found a place that deserved what she was. She had found a man who had the eyes to see her clearly, and the character to be worthy of being seen in return. She had saved something real, not through passivity, not through beauty, not through being chosen by luck, but through the same thing she had always been capable, honest, unbreakable, and utterly completely herself. She had not been rescued. She had arrived, and Hayes Ridge whole and standing and finally free was exactly where she was meant to be.